Welcome back. Lower your sword. Set down your pack. Whatever noise the day brought you, let it fade now. You are in Skyrim. The fire crackles somewhere close. The wind outside is nothing but white sound. And tonight, we are going somewhere most travelers never find, into the corners of this world that don't announce themselves, past the doors that don't have markers, down into the depths where history breathes and something ancient waits in the dark. These are the hidden ones, the bosses that exist in Skyrim not because a quest arrow pointed you toward them, but because the world put them there and waited to see if you were paying attention. Some of them are creatures of staggering power sealed away by long-dead heroes. Some of them are scholars who made one terrible choice and became something between the living and the dead. Some are grieving things, waiting not for a fight, but for someone to finally understand what they lost. And some of them, the very rarest ones, are so well concealed that entire generations of Dragonborn walked past them without ever knowing they existed. Pull the blanket up, get comfortable, let the weight of the day settle. We have a long journey ahead of us, and tonight there is nowhere you need to be except here. Drop a comment and tell me what time it is where you are and where in the world you are watching from. And if you want more nights like this one, subscribe. It means everything. Part 1. Early roads, old shadows, the bosses that wait near the beginning. There is something particular about the early roads in Skyrim. They feel safe at first. Riverwood is behind you, its warm lights already fading. The path to Whiterun is clear and wide enough that the cart ruts from 100 merchant wagons have carved twin grooves into the earth. Birds you cannot quite see call to each other somewhere in the pines. And yet Skyrim has always had a habit of hiding its most interesting things in the places that look the most ordinary. The very first of these is a woman who sits outside her house. She is old, her back is to the road. She does not look threatening. She is simply there in that specific way that the elderly sometimes are, settled into themselves, occupying a piece of the world with a quiet permanence that makes them seem like part of the landscape. If you walk past without curiosity, nothing happens. The road continues. The wind sighs. You find your way to whatever you were looking for. But if you walk through her door, everything changes. Her name is Anise, and she has been living in that little house southwest of Riverwood for longer than most of her neighbors have been alive. Inside her home, the first thing you notice is the arcane enchanter, then the alchemical supplies, then the shelf of peculiarly specific ingredients, things that a person does not keep unless they know exactly what they are for. And when you find the cellar hatch and descend into it, what you find below is a witch's workshop, lit by candles that have been burning so long the wax has pooled into solid formations around them. There is a letter down there. It is addressed to Anise's sister, and it makes perfectly clear what Anise has been doing in that little house by the road, practicing conjuration, studying the darker ends of the alchemical arts, and doing all of it quietly, patiently, without drawing attention. She has been hiding in plain sight, a traveling hedge witch who found a good spot and stayed. The moment you read that letter and go back upstairs, she knows. She has known since you touched the handle of her cellar door, and she attacks you. Anise fights differently from most witches in Skyrim. She does not retreat and throw spells from a distance. She comes at you with the directness of someone who has spent decades practicing this in the privacy of her own home. Her spells come fast. If you encounter her in the first few hours of a new game, she can kill you before you understand what is happening. A frost spell that staggers you, a conjured creature already summoned before you can close the distance. She is not a dramatic boss. There is no throne room, no dramatic descent into an underground lair, no final cinematic. She is just an old woman who did not want to be found, and now she is making that very clear. What makes Anise remarkable is not her difficulty, but her texture. She represents a whole category of Skyrim encounter that the game does so well, the secret that was always visible, that required nothing more complicated than a slightly different kind of looking. She was sitting there the whole time. Every road traveler in Skyrim had walked past her house. Some of them probably nodded to her. Some of them probably bought something from her, made small talk, moved on. None of them opened the door. There is a lesson in her for the rest of this journey. Skyrim hides things in the obvious places. Moving a little further along those early roads, there is a crypt in the mountains near Dawnstar that most people pass through without completing it. Frostmere Crypt sits on a mountainside, and the first thing it presents is exactly what you would expect. Bandits. There are crates and bedrolls and fire pits. The bandits argue about things. Somebody stole a sword. It all feels very mundane. Then you go deeper. The lower level of Frostmere Crypt opens into something that should not be there. A forest, impossibly full and green, somehow surviving underground. A spring that should not have the sunlight to feed the moss around it, but does so anyway, lit by a pale blue luminescence that has no obvious source. The air changes down here. It is cold in the way that cold gets when something is wrong with a place. Not cold the way a cave is cold, but cold the way a room gets cold when something old and unhappy is in it. Her name is Omriel, though by the time you reach her, nobody calls her that. They call her the Pale Lady. The lore around her is fragmentary and quiet, scattered across a few journal entries left by the bandits who made the mistake of camping in her crypt. According to what can be pieced together, Omriel was once a woman who lost her daughter. The loss broke something fundamental in her. Grief can do that. It can hollow a person out so completely that what fills the space where they used to be is not a person anymore, but a force, a need, an absence that keeps moving even after the thing that caused it is long gone. She became what the game calls a wisp mother, which is itself a haunting category of creature. Wisp mothers are the ghosts of women who died in extraordinary grief, transformed by some alchemy of loss and the wild magic that saturates Skyrim's most remote places. They are pale as birch bark. They move with a drifting slowness that feels wrong until suddenly they are very close. They summon pale blue lights that orbit them like small cold moons, and those lights can separate and attack independently, or they can coalesce back into the Wisp Mother and make her stronger. The Pale Lady is the most powerful of them. For thousands of years, she wandered the marshes north of Morthal, the Drakmere Marsh, a half-frozen wetland of skeletal reeds and standing water that reflects the sky in a way that makes it impossible to tell where the ground ends. She looked for her daughter in the faces of every child she found. She never found her. She took children instead, an act of confused desperation that the lore describes with enough bluntness to be genuinely disturbing. She stole them from Morthal, convinced for a moment that each one was hers, and then realized they were not. And by then it was too late for the child to return. Ysgramor's heirs eventually confronted her. They could not kill her outright. The Wisp Mothers exist in a space that makes permanent destruction difficult, tied as they are to the grief that created them. Instead, they sealed her. They created the Pale Blade, an ancient Nordic sword of considerable power, and placed it on a pedestal in the deepest chamber of Frostmere Crypt, directly above her tomb. As long as the blade sat in its place, the Pale Lady remained sealed in her sarcophagus, sleeping in the cold underground forest that had grown over centuries in the magic that leaked from her. Then the bandits came. Then someone took the sword. When you meet her, she has been awake long enough to be angry. She fights you in that drifting, terrible way that Wisp Mothers fight, closing the distance with an uncanny smoothness, splitting her form into copies that each carry her cold fury, filling the underground forest with a brightness that is nothing like warmth. She is one of the most atmospheric boss encounters in the base game, precisely because the location is so unexpected and so beautiful. You are fighting something ancient and sorrowful in the middle of an impossible forest that should not exist underground, and the whole place has the feeling of a fairy tale that took a very dark turn. You have two choices when you find her. You can put the blade back, and she will vanish. The long sleep restored, the seal holding. Or you can fight her and take the blade, and she will die. Placing the blade back feels like the right thing, but removing it again immediately summons her back. So, if you want the weapon, you have to fight. Which means that the quest, under the polite surface of its optional objectives, is really asking a very uncomfortable question. Knowing what you know about how she got here and why she is the way she is, do you still take the sword? Most people do. It is a good sword. But Bethesda left that question in the architecture of the quest design, and it is more interesting for existing there. Not far from Frostmere, along the road that skirts the southern edge of the Pale Hold, you will eventually come across a cave that smells wrong before you see it. The smell is not decay exactly. It is something older than decay. Something chemical and faintly sweet in a way that makes your instincts report danger before your conscious mind has registered what you are smelling. This is Bethardom's, a Dwemer ruin of considerable size, and the thing that makes it unusual is not what it contains, but who it contains. His name is Orshendor. In most Dwemer ruins you will find machines. You will find Falmer, the degraded descendants of the Snow Elves, blinded and broken and feral, and you will find constructs of bronze and steam that have been running their patrol routes without maintenance for thousands of years. All of this is consistent, predictable, part of the familiar grammar of what these ruins offer. Orshendor is different. He is a living person. A mage of the vigilance of Stendar, who came to Bethardams investigating reports of a Periite cult operating inside the ruin. Periite is one of the Daedric princes, the embodiment of pestilence and natural order, and he operates in a way that is subtle even by Daedric standards. He does not appear in visions of fire and overwhelming presence. He reaches into minds quietly, like an infection reaches into a body, slowly, below the threshold of awareness, until the process is already too far along to stop. What happened to Orkendor is that Periite found him useful. The Vigilant came to investigate a cult, and instead became the cult's most powerful member. Periite did something specific to Orkendor that he does to very few mortals. He made him his herald, his representative in Tamriel. This sounds like an honor until you understand what it means in practice. Orshendor has been exposed to Periite's sphere so completely and for so long that he carries disease the way other people carry nothing. He radiates it, he is saturated in it, and the cult around him exists in the grip of a sickness that they believe is holiness. They breathe in what Orshendor breathes out, and they think it is communion. Fighting Orshendor is genuinely alarming because he teleports. Not in the polished way that highly trained battle mages teleport, a controlled vanish and reappearance at a calculated tactical distance, but in an unpredictable, lurching way, like something that is only partially in the world at any given moment. He appears across the room, and you are already taking damage from the spells he cast before he arrived. He vanishes from melee reach and reappears behind you. He is not fighting the way a trained warrior fights. He is fighting the way something fights when the normal rules of space and distance do not apply to it the way they apply to everything else. When he dies, what he leaves behind is a key and the absolute silence of a place that has been holding its breath for a very long time. Bethardams is enormous. It is one of the larger Dwemer ruins accessible in Skyrim, a city within a mountain that takes real exploration time to move through. The Falmer and the cultists coexist in it in a way that feels genuinely strange. They are not allies exactly, but neither are they enemies, and the middle passages of the ruin have a quality of uneasy shared space that is different from anything else in the game. The cultists are sick, visibly and audibly, coughing through their robes, and somehow still fervent in the way that people are fervent when illness has been reframed as meaning. Orshendor is waiting in the deepest chamber. He has been there for a long time. Whether he remembers what he was before Periite found him is a question the game does not answer, and that uncertainty is part of what makes the encounter land. Halted Stream Camp sits northwest of Whiterun, and it announces itself as something very simple: a bandit camp. There is a fire outside. There are guards on patrol. The loot inside is good, but not exceptional. Thousands of players have cleared it, grabbed the ore from the Mammoth Skull collection, and moved on. But in the back of that camp, past the forge and the smelter, there is a word wall. Specifically, a word wall for transmute, which converts iron ore to silver and silver ore to gold. That wall is there because something put it there, and Bethesda's design logic for word walls is that they exist where significant things happened: battles, ceremonies, the deaths of important beings. The word wall at Halted Stream is not explained, not attached to a quest, not given context by any book or NPC you will ever talk to. It simply exists in a bandit camp, as if the bandits themselves do not know what they are sleeping 15 feet from. The boss bandit at Halted Stream scales with your level, as most bandit chiefs do, and at high levels can be a genuinely dangerous fight. But what is more interesting about the camp is its archaeology. Look at what the bandits have been collecting: mammoth skulls, dozens of them, arranged with a care and deliberateness that reads like something between hobby and ritual. There are so many that the camp has clearly been inhabited for a very long time by people who kept returning to this specific activity. Someone here has been doing something with those skulls, or someone did it once, long before these bandits arrived, and the bandits moved into the camp and kept the tradition without understanding what it was. The word wall remembers something the bandits do not. That is Skyrim, distilled. Moving east along the boundary of Whiterun Hold, there is a place called White River Watch that most travelers encounter by accident, drawn by the sound of the river or the thin smoke from the fire outside. It is a cave. The bandits inside are straightforward. Their boss, however, the man named Hajvar Iron Hand, carries a name that the game has given to very few bandits, and that name means something. Named bandits in Skyrim are not random. They have levels attached specifically to their names, histories that are sometimes pieced together from the notes and letters in their camps, motivations that extend beyond simply standing around waiting for someone to kill. Hajvar Iron Hand runs one of the larger bandit operations in the Whiterun region. His camp at White River Watch connects by reputation to other camps. Isa Blackthorn, the woman from the Frostmere Crypt quest, was formerly one of his people. The Pale Lady quest notes that she and Rajir left his gang before ending up at Frostmere, which means that somewhere in the background of that ghost story about grief and imprisonment, Hajvar was there. 1 degree of separation. He fights like a man who has been fighting for a living for a long time, not with the dramatic abilities of a dragon priest or the supernatural wrongness of a wisp mother, but with the economy of someone who has survived a lot of fights by paying attention. He hits hard. He does not waste energy. And when you find his camp, there is always something in it that feels lived in. Bedrolls that have been used, cooking pots with actual ash in them, a letter or two from the network of criminal operations that connects Skyrim's bandit camps in ways the roads and maps do not show. The early roads of Skyrim are not safe. They are just familiar enough to feel safe, and that is precisely the distinction these encounters are built on. Part 2. Dungeons and the Forgotten Dead. Bosses hidden in plain sight. There is a Nordic ruin southeast of Morthal called Vollenrud. It sits in the Pale, which is the widest and emptiest hold in Skyrim, a vast expanse of frozen tundra that gets very little traffic because most of what it contains is weather and the particular silence of somewhere that was never fully settled. Vollenrud does not appear on the journey to anywhere. You find it because you are the kind of person who walks toward the ruins you can see on the horizon just to see what they are. Inside, on the ground near a skeleton, is a set of notes. Heddick's Vollenrud notes, left by a scholar who came here and whose fate is made clear by the presence of the skeleton and the absence of the scholar. The notes describe what Vollenrud is and what it contains. A burial complex, unusually large, with an inner sanctum sealed by a door that requires 2 ceremonial weapons to open. The weapons are replicas of Okis and Eduge, an axe and a sword, the favored arms of the man buried in the deepest chamber. His name was Kevanel the Tongue. In the early First Era, Kevanel led a warrior company of extraordinary skill and a specific gift. They were tongues, practitioners of the Thuum in the Old Mode, before Jurgen Windcaller's philosophy changed how the Thuum was understood and used. These were not the contemplative, restrained users of the voice that the Greybeards would later represent. The tongues of Kvenel's era used the voice the way a hammer is used, directly, forcefully, as a tool of war and conquest. They were celebrated for it. They were feared. Whatever killed Kvenel was significant enough that he warranted a burial complex with sealed chambers and ceremonial guards. The inner sanctum is not just a tomb but a monument, and the scale of it suggests that in his own time, Kvenel was understood to be a figure of genuine historical weight. He is buried as a ghost, not as a draugr, the undead husks that fill most Nordic ruins, their faces dried and hollow, still wearing their ancient armor, animated by a combination of draconic magic and the will that refused to leave. Kvenel exists as pure spirit. He is pale and cold and large in the way that ghosts are large in the Elder Scrolls. Not physically oversized, but somehow taking up more of the space than a physical body would, as if the force of his personality still pushes at the edges of the room. He carries Okin and Eduge, the real weapons, the enchanted ones. The ceremonial replicas were the keys to his door. These are what he actually used. He dual wields them, the axe in one hand, the sword in the other, and he fights with a fluency that speaks to thousands of hours of combat across a lifetime that ended a very long time ago. He is frost-resistant, as ghosts in Nordic tombs often are. The cold of the place has been inside him too long to affect him. He moves faster than you expect, and he hits harder than a spirit of his apparent age should hit. What Kvenel drops when he falls is the real Okin and Eduge. They are enchanted with frost damage, ancient weapons that still carry the precise enchantments put on them in the First Era. maintained somehow through the long cold of the tomb. They are functional. They are remarkable. And getting them requires finding a specific ruin in the Pale that no quest sends you to, and reading notes left by a man who died for his curiosity. North-northeast of Windhelm, accessible by following the coastline until the terrain opens into a series of low, icy hills with a burial mound in their center, there is Ingol Barrow. The place comes attached to a small and easily missed quest that the game technically gives you only if you have accepted a specific faction quest from Windhelm, but the dungeon itself is accessible to anyone who finds it. Ingol was the son of Ysgramor, the father of Nordic civilization in Skyrim, the man who led 500 companions south from Atmora after the Night of Tears massacre, the founder of the lineage that eventually gave rise to the modern Nordic clans, that Ysgramor. His son Ingol sailed south with him and died in the Sea of Ghosts before reaching Tamriel's shores, drowned in a storm that old Nordic sagas attributed to the sea ghosts themselves, malevolent spirits that hunt sailors. Ysgramor built him a burial mound on the shore where the sea would have carried him had he been carried anywhere. Ingol's Shade guards that mound. The Shade is one of the most mechanically unusual boss encounters in Skyrim because of how it scales. Most dungeon bosses scale with your level, in a way that keeps them appropriately challenging, which usually means they become relatively easier as you become more powerful. The difference between your level and the boss's level converges over time. Ingol's Shade does not work this way. The Shade scales dramatically above your level, always. At low levels, it manifests as a powerful Draugr. At mid-levels, it becomes a Draugr Death Overlord. At high levels, it can manifest as a spectral Dragon Priest. Not a full Dragon Priest with the power and abilities of those ancient ritual leaders, but a spectral version imbued with their magic signature, their elemental devastation. The Shade appears to be Ingol's will-given form, the persistence of a warrior who died without a fight, who drowned in the dark water between worlds, whose remains were given a tomb but whose spirit was never satisfied with rest. He does not speak. He does not acknowledge you as a distinct entity. He simply attacks, and keeps attacking, and scales his attack to whatever you have become. The helmet he guards, the Helm of Ingol, is a piece of Ysgramor's family equipment, a circlet that provides resistances to cold and shock, enchanted with the kind of care that a man would put into something made for his dead son. It is one of the better helmets in the early to mid-game, but the more interesting thing about Ingol Barrow is the approach. The barrow has colored orbs in it, small spherical lights that drift around the chambers, blue and green and white, like the bioluminescent deep-sea things that have no business being underground in a frozen Nordic tomb. They do not attack. They do not interact. They simply drift, slowly, in the cold air of the chambers. The old sagas say the sea ghosts that drowned Ingol followed him all the way home. They are not aggressive here. They simply watch, or they remember. It is genuinely unclear which. Moving further into the more complex dungeon architecture that Skyrim builds in its later sections, there is a tomb called Valthium on the southern border of the Reach, tucked into the mountains near Markarth. You find it the way you find many things in Skyrim, by walking towards something that looks interesting and seeing what it turns into. At the entrance is a ghost, not the violent kind. His name is Valdar, and he has been standing at the entrance to Valthium for a very long time, centuries by his account. He was not buried here. He chose to stay, and he chose to stay because of what is buried in the deepest chamber, Hevnorak. Hevnorak was a dragon priest. His name in the dragon language means roughly brutal domination, a name that was given, not chosen, because dragon priests in the Merethic era were often named for the qualities they embodied or the qualities their dragon masters wished them to cultivate. He was a ruler of the Reach long before the Reachmen themselves existed in any recognizable form, when dragons controlled what is now northern Tamriel through a network of priest intermediaries who managed mortal populations on the dragon's behalf. He was powerful enough that simply killing him was considered insufficient. Instead, he was imprisoned, sealed in his sarcophagus with a ritual that required constant maintenance to hold. Valdar was one of the last people to understand the ritual. Rather than find someone to take his place, he stayed. He became a ghost so that he could keep the seals holding. He has been doing this, alone, at the entrance to a forgotten tomb in a mountain range that has changed hands politically at least a dozen times since he was alive. The quest he gives you is to collect 3 vessels of Hevnorok's power, fragments of the Dragon Priest's essence that have been bleeding off into the dungeon over centuries, and bring them back to him so that the ritual can be strengthened. But what actually happens, what happens if you make a particular choice in the sequence, is that the vessels are used to revive Hevnorok instead. He emerges from his sarcophagus in the way that all dragon priests emerge, slowly, with enormous weight and a crackling of energy that suggests something that was sleeping at very low power for a very long time is now running at full capacity. He is shock specialized, meaning his spells come in arcs of crackling electricity rather than the more common fire or frost. He is resistant to poison and disease. His mask, the Hevnorok mask, grants exactly those resistances to whoever wears it, and a dragon priest's equipment typically reflects their specific domain. Fighting him in the chamber where he was imprisoned has a particular quality. Valdar is still there. His ghost watches the fight he spent centuries trying to prevent. There is nothing in the game's writing that addresses how Valdar feels about this, which makes it somehow worse. The dungeon architecture of Valthume is worth exploring for its own sake, separate from the boss at the end. It is one of the more elaborate Nordic tombs in terms of its environmental storytelling. The marks of the ritual that sealed Hevnorok are visible throughout the chambers, old runes carved into stone that still faintly glow with whatever was put into them. The Dwemer did not build this place, but they influenced the region enough that some of their architectural vocabulary crept into the design of later Nordic construction. You can see it in the proportions of certain chambers, the way specific load-bearing elements have been solved, the slight wrongness that comes from one culture imitating another without fully understanding the original's intentions. Valthume is sad in the specific way that devotion becomes sad when it is finally over. Valdar spent centuries on a vigil that ended with the very thing he was preventing. What happens to a ghost when their purpose is gone is a question Skyrim does not answer. They linger, usually. The purpose is gone, but the habit of existing remains. In the Pale, very close to the road that runs north toward Dawnstar from Whiterun, there is a specific kind of encounter that most players have without fully registering. A cave called Pine Moon Cave, a small and relatively unremarkable place by the standards of Skyrim's dungeons. But inside, if you go deep enough, there is something that does not fit the standard grammar of cave encounters. A vampire who is not part of the Dawnguard questline, not involved in Castle Volkihar, not connected to any of the larger vampire politics of the Fourth Era. A standalone vampire named Alva, or more precisely a vampire coven with a specific and very old leader somewhere in its background. The individual caves and small encounters that involve vampires before Dawnguard add texture to the vampire ecology that the DLC later formalizes. There is a whole history of vampirism in Skyrim's Fourth Era that predates Harkon and his obsession with the sun. Older covens, older bloodlines, practitioners of vampirism who existed in the same world as the Volkihar, but were not part of their specific political structure. These are the vampires in the unmarked caves, the ones with no backstory attached, the ones who are simply there because Skyrim has been Skyrim long enough that a lot of different things have made homes in its dark places. The encounter quality of these smaller vampire lairs has a different texture from the grand set pieces of Dawnguard. They are quieter, more personal. The scale of the horror is domestic rather than cosmic. Not the end of the sun, but the end of one specific village's sense of safety, which is, in its own way, more frightening. Part 3. The Reach and its Secrets, Forsworn Kings and Dwemer Madness. The Reach is Skyrim's strangest hold, and this is not a close contest. Every hold in Skyrim has its character. The Rift is warm and autumnal, and feels like harvest season in the middle of winter. The Pale is wide and cold and empty in the way of real loneliness. Winterhold is wind and memory. But the Reach is something different. It is the oldest settled place in Skyrim, geologically distinct from the rest of the province. Its red rock carved by the Karth River into formations that look like they belong somewhere further south. And it has politics that are genuinely messy in ways that most of Skyrim's conflicts are not, because the people who have been there the longest are not the Nords. The Forsworn were there first. They are the descendants of the Reachmen, the original inhabitants of the Reach, a mixed-blood people who had been in those red canyons since before the Nords came south from Atmora. The Nords colonized the Reach the way colonizers colonize, by force, by treaty, by the slow grinding of one culture against another, until the original is either absorbed or pushed to the margins. The Reachmen were pushed to the margins. The Forsworn are what happens when the margins become a war. All of this is context for the Briarheart. The Forsworn Briarhearts are not simply strong warriors. They are something specific and terrible, made by a ritual that transforms a living person into something that is no longer quite living. A Hagraven half-human, half-something else, the twisted ritual practitioners who serve as the Forsworn's spiritual leaders, performs a ceremony on a willing Forsworn warrior. The warrior's heart is cut out. A briar heart, a thorned mass of vegetation that exists in some space between plant matter and magical artifact, is placed in the cavity where the heart was. The wound closes. The warrior rises. They should be dead. By every biological standard, they should be dead. Their actual organic heart has been removed and replaced with something that does not beat. But they are not dead. And the power that animates them is enough that Briarheart warriors are among the most dangerous non-supernatural enemies in the game. Their bodies have been given over to whatever force the Hagraven channeled through the Briarheart, and that force is angry in the way that old dispossession is angry, with a patience and a depth that outlasts any individual reason for it. What most players do not know is that a Briarheart can be pickpocketed. Specifically, if you are skilled enough and quiet enough, you can remove the Briarheart from a Briarheart's chest while they are still standing. They die instantly. The heart was not organic. It had no redundancy. The moment it leaves the body, there is nothing to animate the body, and the body understands this and falls. This is either the most pragmatic thing in Skyrim or the most disturbing, depending on your frame of reference. The Forsworn Briarheart bosses that inhabit the major Forsworn camps, Druadach Redoubt, Lost Valley Redoubt, Deepwood Redoubt, Karthspire, carry the specific weight of their origin story in every fight. They are fast. They hit with the specificity of someone who chose this. The Hagraven removed the heart of a volunteer, not a conscript. Every Briarheart warrior knew what they were agreeing to. And in the context of the Forsworn's history, the dispossession, the Markarth incident, the decades of being pushed out of their own land, the choice makes a terrible kind of sense. The most significant hidden Forsworn encounter involves the deeper chambers of some of these camps, where the Hagraven herself can be found. Hagravens are not easy to fight. They combine the range fire of a combat mage with the close-quarters viciousness of something that has long since stopped caring what it looks like and started caring only about what it can do. They carry unique items. They hold specific conversations if you know how to prompt them. And the larger ones, the Hagraven bosses at the apex of the major Forsworn positions, have levels and abilities that exceed their generic counterparts significantly. Thardams, which was mentioned in the previous section for its resident Orchendor, connects to a larger pattern of Dwemer ruins in the Reach that rewards patient exploration. The Reach has more Dwemer ruins per square mile than any other hold in Skyrim, which reflects the historical reality of Dwemer settlement. The Dwemer were most densely established in what is now the Reach and in Morrowind, and the ruins they left behind are correspondingly thicker on the ground in those places. Among these ruins is Nchuan Zel, directly beneath Markarth, buried so completely under the city that the Jarl's Keep sits atop it and most of Markarth's residents have no idea it exists. Nchuan Zel is one of the larger Dwemer complexes in the game, a city within the bedrock, and what happened in it is documented in the notes of an ill-fated expedition. A group of scholars and their guards went in to document and excavate. Almost none of them came back. The Falmer took them. But the deeper chambers held something else. A Dwarven Centurion, which is the largest and most powerful class of Dwemer automatons still operational in Skyrim's ruins. The Centurions were not built for patrol or maintenance. They were the last line of defense in Dwemer installations, the response to threats that the smaller constructs could not handle, built to operate at scales that made them fundamentally different from the spheres and spiders you encounter in the upper chambers. The Centurion in Nchuan Zel is not a named boss in the traditional sense. It does not have a title or a specific history attached to it by the game's lore, but it functions as the dungeon's final encounter, and fighting it in the specific context of what is underneath Markarth. This forsworn, contested Nordic city, built on top of a Dwemer city, built on top of whatever was there before the Dwemer arrived, gives the encounter a quality that a Centurion in a less complex location would not have. The steam that vents from its joints when you damage it is not aesthetic. The Dwemer built their constructs to vent heat as a cooling mechanism, and the fact that this mechanism still works after thousands of years of zero maintenance is its own kind of statement about what the Dwemer achieved. The Centurion is not aware of you as a person. It does not hate you or fear you. It simply has a directive that was encoded into it a very long time ago, and it is executing that directive, which is, in context, not comforting. Deep within the Reach, near the border of Hofengar Hold, the Dwemer ruin of Volskiga sprawls across a mountainside in a way that suggests it was once a significant settlement. The name means something close to Spectre Peak, or Haunted Summit, in the old Nordic naming conventions that blended with Dwemer place names over centuries. The approach to it is long enough that the journey becomes its own thing. You climb through bandits and Draugr, and the increasingly thin air of the upper slopes, and the ruins keep being visible ahead of you, always slightly further than they look, until finally you arrive at the summit. Volsung is there. Of all the dragon priests in Skyrim, Volsung has perhaps the most unusual physical location. Every other dragon priest is inside a dungeon, protected by layers of Draugr, in chambers that were designed to hold them safe. Volsung is outside. He waits at the summit of his mountain in an open-air sarcophagus next to a word wall, with the whole of northwestern Skyrim visible below him on a clear day. His name means horrible in the dragon tongue. This was apparently considered an appropriate name, which tells you something about the context it was given in. Volsung is a generalist mage in terms of his fighting style, drawing on alteration, conjuration, destruction, and restoration. He does not specialize in a single element the way some dragon priests do. Instead, he hits you with a rotating suite of magical attacks that requires constant adjustment. Frost when you think he's going to use fire, conjured threats appearing between you and him, alteration spells slowing your approach, restoration magic, healing the damage you thought you dealt. He is efficient in the way that very old, very experienced practitioners of magic become efficient, without the specificity that makes some fights predictable. What he drops is the Volsung mask, which is one of the most practically useful of the Dragon Priest masks. It provides water breathing, increases carrying capacity significantly, and reduces the cost of all shouts. The carrying capacity bonus alone makes it worth wearing for any player who runs into the common Skyrim problem of being over-encumbered in the middle of nowhere. But the water breathing is the curious one, a utility that Volsung himself presumably had no use for, suggesting that the mask's enchantments were designed for the wearer's benefit rather than reflecting the priest's own abilities. A gift from something that is not giving anymore. Part 4. Dragon Priests and Ancient Masks, the 8 who wait. The Dragon Priests are not random. This is the most important thing to understand about them before going further. They were not simply powerful members of the dragon cult who happened to die in fortresses where their magic preserved them through the ages. They were a specific institution, a hierarchy, almost feudal in its structure, with individual priests bound by oath and by the power of the mask they wore to specific dragons, serving as those dragons' intermediaries with the mortal populations they controlled. There were 8 who were buried in Skyrim, 8 who wore named masks. 8 who, when Alduin was defeated and the Dragon War ended, refused to join their masters in death and chose instead to wait in their tombs for the cycle to turn. They have been waiting for a very long time. The first and perhaps most startlingly located of them is Croesus, whose name means sorrow in the dragon language. He does not wait inside a dungeon. He waits at Sheerpoint, a dragon lair on a cliff top between Whiterun Hold, the Pale, and Winterhold Hold, a high open place with a word wall behind him, and, if you have already begun triggering dragon encounters, a dragon circling above. Most Dragon Priest encounters give you the dignity of approaching alone. You descend through a dungeon, clear the Draugr, and meet the priest at the end with whatever advantage your clearing has given you. Croesus gives you none of this. He rises from his sarcophagus in the open air at the moment you approach the word wall. And if there is a dragon overhead, which there often is, you are fighting 2 of Skyrim's most dangerous single enemies simultaneously, with no cover and no room to retreat. Croesus fights with a staff of fireballs and with his own considerable magic, cycling through the schools with the practiced fluency of someone who spent centuries before his death studying and practicing. He wears a mask that grants bonuses to archery, lockpicking, and alchemy, a combination that suggests he had interests beyond simple magical combat, that the life of a dragon priest in the Merethic era was not purely martial but involved the full range of what power required: knowledge acquisition, material gathering, the precise targeting of specific threats. The irony of a dragon priest who valued stealth and precision, dying in an open field in permanent view of the sky, is probably not lost on anyone. So, Otar, the Mad, resides in Ragnvald, a Nordic ruin northeast of Markarth in the Reach. His story is longer and more complicated than most of the dragon priests. He was a chieftain before he was a dragon priest, a ruler of the city that Ragnvald once was, in the Merethic era when the dragon cult was still the dominant governing structure of Skyrim's population. He was, by the accounts that exist, not always mad. The madness came. Nobody is entirely sure what caused it. The lore suggests that the process of becoming a dragon priest, the rituals of service, the masks, the gradual absorption of draconic magic into a mortal body that was not built to hold it, took different people differently. Some became ascetic and controlled, like the long-serving priests who were still conducting ceremonies when the Dragon War began. Others were changed in ways that were less governed. Otar was changed in the second way. He became cruel. The city he had governed began to fear him instead of trust him. The sacrifices the dragon cult required of its worshippers, which had always been a feature of the system, became something worse under Otar's administration. More frequent, more personal, more concerned with power for its own sake than with the maintenance of the pact between dragons and mortals. Two Nordic heroes, Syrek and Torsten, were sent to stop him. They could not kill him. Dragon priests in their full power are not simply killed by warriors with courage. The magic that saturates them requires specific ritual knowledge to counter, and the combination of Otar's elemental abilities, his shock-specialized destructive capacity, and whatever had happened to his mind made him immune to straightforward martial resolution. So, Syrek and Torsten did the only thing they could. They sealed him. They locked him in a sarcophagus. They encoded 2 skull keys, shaped like their own skulls, a final morbid joke or a final sincere offering, it is unclear which, with the power to open the locks. And then they entered the dungeon themselves and laid down to wait, choosing to die where he was imprisoned so that the keys would never leave the ruin. When you enter Ragnvald, Syrek and Torsten are still there, still guarding. The ruin is full of Draugr and the specific silent watchfulness of a place that has been waiting for something for millennia. The skull keys are on the bodies of 2 particularly powerful Draugr, Syrek's skull key and Torsten's skull key, and getting them requires defeating 2 of the dungeon's hardest encounters before you even reach the main chamber. When you place both keys and the sarcophagus opens, Otar rises. He is wild in a way that the other dragon priests are not. Most dragon priests fight with something that reads as controlled even through the horror of what they are. The magic is directed, measured, a sophisticated application of power. Otar attacks with a chaotic urgency, as if the centuries of imprisonment, rather than diminishing his madness, have concentrated it. He uses shock magic almost exclusively, and he uses it at volumes that fill the chamber, arcs of electricity that leap between surfaces and targets, making the already enclosed space of his burial chamber feel smaller and more dangerous. His resistance to fire, frost, and shock, the enchantment of his mask, means that elemental retaliation is blunted, and you are forced to engage with him at a level of directness that feels dangerous given what he can do. The Otar mask, when you get it, provides 30% resistance to all 3 elements. It is one of the most practically useful enchantments in the game for players who frequently find themselves caught in elemental damage from multiple sources. The irony that it comes from the most uncontrolled of the dragon priests, the one whose own elemental power was never constrained or directed in the way his peers managed theirs, is part of Skyrim's consistent logic that the most useful things come from the hardest places. Ragod is in the southeast of the map, in Forel Host, and his story has already been touched on in the transcript that inspired this format, the last stand of the dragon cult, the mass suicide that kept King Harold's soldiers from breaching the monastery. But what that summary leaves out is the physical quality of Forel Host itself, which is one of the most atmospheric locations in Skyrim. It is built into the face of a cliff in the Jural Mountains. The exterior is massive, Imposing in the way that things built by people who believed in their cause with total conviction are imposing. Inside, the rooms are layered with the detritus of a community that was alive and then was not. Eating utensils, bedrolls, the books and tools and personal effects that a large group of people accumulates over years. The mass suicide is visible in the positioning of the bodies. They did not fall in combat. They are sitting, lying, in the specific positions of people who chose where they wanted to be for the end and then were there. The poison they drank has been in the air of Forelhost long enough that entering certain chambers without protection triggers a gradual health drain, a design choice that is both mechanically interesting and thematically perfect. The decision the cult made is still in the walls of the place. Ragul is the last living thing inside. His burial chamber is deeper than all the rest, and when he rises from it, what you are meeting is the man who gave the order. The man who looked at the situation, heralds soldiers at the gate, the dragon war already lost, the age of dragon supremacy already fading, and decided that this was the way it had to end. His mask enhances stamina significantly. He fights with the certainty of someone who has no doubt about what he is doing, which is its own kind of frightening. Forelhost is also notable for being the only Dragon Priest location that respawns. After Ragad is defeated, if you return once the dungeon has cycled, a generic Dragon Priest occupies his chamber. The lore reason for this is not clearly stated. The mechanical reason is presumably to give players a source of Dragon Priest encounters past the one-time fights. But the implication it creates, that the energy of the place, the ritual weight of what happened in Forelhost, is strong enough to keep generating Dragon Priests the way some places in Skyrim generate weather, adds an unintended dimension to an already heavy location. Vokun is in Highgate Ruins in the Pale, and his mask's name means shadow. He is the most mysterious of the 8 Dragon Priests in terms of the lore attached to him. The game has less to say about his history than about almost any of the others, which creates a space that feels like something is missing, like a chapter that was deliberately left out. What is known, he was buried in Highgate Ruins in the Pale, a large Nordic tomb whose architecture suggests he was a figure of significant status. He holds a unique scroll, specifically a scroll relating to Ysgramor's bloodline, which would have made him valuable to anyone interested in the genealogy of Nordic nobility or the religious history of the companions. The fact that a dragon priest has this document is interesting, and the leading interpretation is that Vokun may have been connected to the companions before his role as a dragon priest, that he existed in the specific historical moment when the companions and the dragon cult were overlapping institutions rather than opposed ones. The connection is speculative, but the scroll is not. The scroll is there, and Vokun carried it for thousands of years of undeath, which suggests either that the connection was real and the scroll meant something to him, or that the archival instinct of a scholar priest persisted through death and transformation in a way that makes a strange kind of sense. He fights with the full suite of destruction magic and a powerful staff of fireballs, and the quest that takes you to him, a scroll for Anska, involves helping a scholar named Anska recover a document that she believes connects her to Ysgramor's line. Anska will fight Vokun alongside you, which makes him the one dragon priest encounter where you are not definitively alone, and the assistance she provides is genuine rather than performative. Morokai is the dragon priest that the College of Winterhold quest takes you to, deep in the ruins of Labyrinthian, and his story involves an earlier group of mages who also went into Labyrinthian and did not all come out. Savos Aren, the archmage of the college, is part of that story. The discovery of what happened to his companions, the 2 students he bound to the task of keeping Morokai imprisoned while he escaped, is one of the more genuinely disturbing pieces of environmental storytelling in the game. Morokai wields the Staff of Magnus. This is not incidental. The Staff of Magnus is an artifact of staggering magical significance, a tool made for or by Magnus himself, the architect of reality's magical laws, the entity who tore the sun into existence as his escape route from the mortal world. The staff can drain and control magical energy at a scale that makes it among the most powerful objects a mortal can hold. The fact that it has been in Morokai's possession for an unknown period of time, in the deepest chamber of the ancient capital of Dragon Cult civilization, raises questions that the quest does not fully answer about how it got there and what Morokai was doing with it. His mask grants a complete doubling of magicka regeneration rate. The implication is that Morake was himself a dedicated scholar of magical theory, even within the dragon cult, someone who studied magic not simply as a tool of dominance, but as a subject worth understanding for its own sake. The last of the 8 main dragon priests is Na Kran, who guards the portal to Sovngarde at Skuldafn. He is the only dragon priest whose encounter is tied directly to the main quest. You cannot meet him except during the World Eater's Eyrie, the penultimate quest of Skyrim's main story. His staff is the key that opens the portal. His mask enhances magicka and reduces the cost of destruction and restoration magic. He stands between you and the end of the world, and he fights with the specific ferocity of something that has been waiting for this particular moment. Beyond the named 8, there are dragon priests added in the Dragonborn DLC. Azadal in Kolbjorn Barrow, Duka-On at White Ridge Sanctum, Za-Chrysos on Bloodskull Barrow. But those are stories for a later section. What the 8 in Skyrim represent, taken together, is a portrait of the dragon cult at its most powerful and most committed. 8 individuals who served so completely that even death was not enough to release them from service. Part 5. Realms Below. Daedric encounters and the space between worlds. Not everything that waits for you in Skyrim is waiting in the mortal world. The Daedric princes maintain their own realms, planes of oblivion that operate according to each prince's nature and will, places that are not Tamriel but are connected to it by the thin membrane of reality that separates the mundane from the divine. These realms are accessible by various means, and some of them contain encounters that are among the most unusual and the most deeply hidden in all of Skyrim's content. The Soul Cairn is one of these. It is accessed through Castle Volkihar during the Dawnguard questline, through a portal that requires either vampirism or a partial soul trap, a piece of your own life force traded to the ideal masters who control this plane in exchange for passage. The Soul Cairn is ruled not by a Daedric prince in the traditional sense, but by the ideal masters, beings of unclear origin who exist as enormous crystalline soul gems, floating in the purple sky of a dimension that looks like the end of everything. The landscape of the Soul Cairn is deliberately disorienting. The horizon is flat in a way that feels wrong. The sky is the color of old bruises, and the structures scattered throughout the plain are architectural fragments that seem to belong to buildings that no longer entirely exist. Columns without ceilings, staircases that lead to open air, rooms that are mostly emptiness with a few objects preserved in them, as if time stopped and left the furniture behind. Souls drift through this landscape in their shades, people who died with soul gems active, whose essences were trapped and used for enchanting, who ended up here instead of in Sovngarde or the afterlife of their faith. They speak in fragments. They ask questions that do not have answers. 3 Reaper Gen fragments are hidden in this landscape, in chests beneath the largest of the ideal master crystals, the ones whose proximity drains your health in a steady ambient bleed. The crystals pulse with a cold purple light that is nothing like warmth and nothing like natural luminescence. They are massive, larger than buildings, and they float in the air above their structures with a weight that the physics of the place only partially acknowledge. Finding all 3 fragments and bringing them to the Reaper's lair, a specific chamber in the Soul Cairn that you might walk past without entering because it does not look different from the other fragmentary structures, allows you to place them on an altar. The souls in the Soul Cairn mention the Reaper in whispers. They do not know what it is exactly, only that it is something to be afraid of, in a place that is already entirely composed of things to be afraid of. The Reaper rises. It is enormous. It wears the executioner's hood and robes of an imperial headsman, but at a scale that makes those garments look ceremonial, something borrowed from the vocabulary of mortal death rituals and scaled up to the proportions of something that exists beyond the mortal understanding of death. Its eyes burn red in the shadow of the hood. It carries an iron battle axe whose weight it does not need, given what it is, but carries because the instrument of execution should be specific, should be visible, should be something that the condemned can see and understand. It spits green blight in a way that connects it to the afflicted, Periite's servants in the mortal world, though how a guardian of the Soul Cairn relates to Periite's sphere is not explained by the game. When it dies, it drops 3 black soul gems and a Daedra heart, which suggests strongly that whatever the Reaper is, it is Daedric in nature, or at least Daedric in construction. A guardian commissioned from Oblivion to keep the souls of the Cairn from leaving. The Reaper is not mentioned in any NPC's dialogue in Dawnguard with any specificity. No quest sends you to it. No completion marker appears when you kill it. It is simply an encounter that the game hid inside an already hidden dimension, inside an already optional DLC. And it rewards the player who goes looking for everything with a fight that is meaningfully difficult and a set of loot that confirms something unusual happened. In Cold Harbor, which is Molag Bal's realm, though you cannot travel there in Skyrim's main content, the connection to certain events in the game is theoretical rather than direct. But Molag Bal's influence on Skyrim is everywhere, because Molag Bal created vampirism, and vampirism is genuinely everywhere. Every coven you encounter, every castle, every isolated mage who made a bargain they could not unmake, is Molag Bal's reach extending into the mortal world through the vector of a disease that is also a gift, that is also a curse. The optional encounters with vampire masters, not just the Dawnguard storyline, but the standalone coven encounters scattered across Skyrim's wilderness, are each small nodes in a network that extends all the way back to Molag Bal's original act of violation and creation. The details of which covens exist where, and what their specific histories are, could fill another script entirely. For now, the relevant point is that every master vampire in Skyrim is a hidden boss in the truest sense, powerful, optional, and deeply connected to a lore that extends far beyond the specific dungeon they inhabit. Before moving on from Daedric territory entirely, it is worth noting the Atronach Forge beneath the College of Winterhold. It is accessed through the Midden, a sub-basement beneath the college's main hall, and it requires specific ingredients to activate, including a sigil stone that can only be obtained in the Dawnguard questline. When active, it can create Daedric equipment and, with the right combination of ingredients, summon and bind specific Daedric entities to service. The entities it summons are not traditional enemies in the dungeon sense, but they are among the most powerful Daedric beings you can encounter in Skyrim outside of quest-driven confrontations. And the forge that summons them was built by someone who understood Daedric binding at a level that most of the college's current faculty would consider either impossible or inadvisable. The fact that it exists in the Midden, a neglected half-flooded sub-basement full of old experiments and the occasional horror, suggests that whoever built it was not part of the official college curriculum. Part 6. Forts, Fields, and Bandit Lords. The bosses who chose this life. There is a category of hidden boss in Skyrim that does not involve ancient magic, or undead priests, or Daedric entities of obscure origin. These are the people who simply got very good at being dangerous in the mortal world, and set up operations in places that the roads do not quite reach. They are, in their way, harder to write about than the cosmic ones. A dragon priest is alien enough that encountering one is more an experience of something ancient and vast than of a person with choices. The bandit lord in her fort is a person with choices. She chose this. She chose the specific violence of the Skyrim wilderness over any of the other lives available to her. And she has been doing it long enough and well enough that she is still alive, which in the context of Skyrim's bandit ecology is itself a remarkable achievement. Rigel Strongarm controls Pine Peak Cavern, a cave southeast of Iverstead with a boss level that scales to some of the highest in the game for a non-supernatural enemy. She runs a disciplined operation. The bandits in her employ are better organized than most, stationed in defensible positions, and the deeper you go into her cave, the better armed they get. By the time you reach Rigel herself, you have fought through enough of her people to know that she selected them carefully. She carries an unenchanted two-handed warhammer that she swings with a precision that does not look like it should work with a two-handed weapon. Most warriors who choose two-handed weapons in Skyrim fight with a kind of committed momentum. They commit to the swing, and the swing either lands or it does not. Rigel fights with her warhammer the way a more technical fighter would fight with a sword, adjusting, interrupting, using the hammer's weight as a counterbalance as much as a weapon. She has survived long enough that she has learned things about combat that the formal training at any guild or military institution does not teach, because those institutions do not survive long enough to accumulate that specific knowledge. Gunzul, whose hideout is in a cave called Cragwallow Slope in the area south of Windhelm, is an orc warrior with a mask, the Cracked Tusk Vault, which is an underground location connected to his operation. He guards specific items of modest value, that have been attributed to him by quest givers looking for recovered property. But the interesting thing about Gunzul is not what he guards, but how he defends it. He has layered his operation with traps in a way that suggests genuine tactical thought. Pressure plates, tripwires, falling ceiling mechanisms placed specifically to punish people who rush. And the traps get more sophisticated as you get closer to the vault. This is a boss who has had enough attempts on his position that he has started to design his own space around the specific failure modes of previous attackers. The traps tell you about the fights he survived. That tripwire was put there because someone once came in fast and got past the pressure plate. The caged room was designed after someone managed to fight through the guards, using ranged attacks from the entrance. There is a bandit lord in Broken Ore Grotto on the northern coast near Solitude, who runs a sea-based operation that connects to the destruction of a specific ship the East Empire Company uses for trade. His name is Jari Ra, and the remarkable thing about him is that his operation spans both land and sea. The grotto is accessible from the ocean, and the shipwreck he engineered as part of his plan to loot a vessel is visible from certain coastline positions. He hired help, then killed his hired help to keep the plan contained. This makes him not simply a bandit lord, but a criminal strategist of some ambition, and the encounter with him feels appropriately different from a cave with a strong man inside. Hajvar Iron Hand was mentioned in an earlier section, but deserves fuller treatment here. His operation at White River Watch is notable for its connections. The Isa Blackthorn connection to Frostmere Crypt has been covered, but the broader picture is of a bandit network that extends across the central Skyrim region. Multiple camps with either active ties to Iron Hand's organization or former members who spun off into their own operations after leaving. He is not a warlord in the formal sense that some of the fort-based bandit leaders are. He is more like a franchiser. The White River Watch operation is his base, but the influence reaches. What makes fighting named bandit leaders rewarding in a way that goes beyond the mechanical is the accumulated texture of their operations. The journals and letters in their camps tell you who they were before. Almost every named bandit leader in Skyrim has a background that predates the banditry: a former soldier, a tradesperson who ran out of luck, a mage who lost access to the college, a failed farmer or merchant who found that the skills required to survive in Skyrim's wilderness were more reliably valuable than the skills the economy could use. There is no judgment in this observation. Skyrim is hard, and the gap between respectable poverty and criminal success is not always as wide as the holds would prefer to present it. The encounters with named Forsworn leaders in the major camps are worth separate discussion in this category. The Reach's Forsworn are not simply criminals in the way that the Road Bandits are criminals. They have a political structure, a religious leadership, a defined territorial claim. The leaders of camps like Druidok Redoubt and Lost Valley Redoubt are not just strong fighters. They are the equivalents of hold jarls in the Forsworn's parallel governance structure, and the items they carry and the conversations the game allows you to access through certain quest lines give them a depth that most bandit bosses do not have. Modanok, the king in rags, is the most extreme example of this. Found in Sidna Mine, the Nord prison that is built into a Dwemer ruin, which is itself a spatial metaphor for the entire political situation in the Reach. Modanok is the Forsworn's imprisoned leader, held for years by Markarth's Jarl. What he has done in prison is extraordinary. Built a Forsworn network inside the prison walls, maintained his political authority through the iron architecture of isolation, and kept the movement alive from a cell. He is a boss, technically, in that you can fight and kill him. But he is also one of the more complex characters in the game, a man whose cause has genuine legitimacy and whose methods are genuinely violent, and who sits in the space between those two things with a clarity about the contradiction that is rarer in Skyrim's writing than you might expect. The orc strongholds scattered across Skyrim each have a chief who functions as a hidden boss in the practical sense. Not hidden in terms of lore or location, but hidden in terms of the social code that governs access to orc culture. You can only fight the chief of a stronghold, traditionally, through the Orc Challenge ritual, a declared one-on-one combat to determine leadership. The chief is always the strongest orc in the stronghold, maintained in that position precisely because anyone strong enough to take it has the right to try, and everyone who tries and fails gives the chief more practice. These fights are honest in a way that most of Skyrim's combat is not. There is no ambush, no magic surprise, no environmental hazard tilting the fight. Two people in a space, one of whom has been fighting in that space for years, the other of whom has been fighting everywhere and has absorbed dragon souls. It is the specific test of the orc philosophy made physical. Part 7. The Undead and the Undying. Vampire Masters, across Skyrim, before the Dawnguard questline, before Castle Volkihar, before Harkon and his obsession with blocking the sun and his vision of vampire supremacy made actual to Skyrim in the most literal possible way, vampires were already everywhere. They existed in the same way that wolves and trolls existed, as a feature of the wilderness, a category of creature that appeared in specific types of locations and which most adventurers dealt with without attaching larger significance to. The vampire masters of the pre-Dawnguard ecology are some of Skyrim's most textured hidden bosses because they exist in that liminal space between monster and person that vampire lore has always occupied. They are not simply dangerous predators. They are people who were turned, or people who chose it, who built lives and covens around an existence that the mortal world considers an abomination. The most extensively lore-developed of these is Movarth Piquine. His story is told in a book called Immortal Blood, which is found in various locations across Skyrim and reads as a first-hand account, probably fictionalized or dramatized but based on real lore, of Movarth's life as a vampire hunter. He was a trainer in the Fighters Guild who shifted his career toward vampire hunting after developing both the skill and the obsession. He is described in the book as almost supernatural in his human capacity for patience and observation, someone who studied his quarry with the comprehensive focus of a scholar rather than the hot urgency of a mortal man who hates what he is hunting. Over years, he learned the specific characteristics of every major vampire tribe in Tamriel, the Volkihar of Skyrim, cold, frost-adapted, lair-dwelling, the Kirilth of Valenwood, tree-adapted, patient, nearly invisible in forested terrain, the Cyrodiilic Vampirum order, sophisticated, urban, fully integrated into mortal society in a way that made them nearly impossible to identify. The priest who was guiding his research had extraordinary knowledge of all of them, perhaps too extraordinary. When Movarth returned from his failed search for the Vampirum order, who were, as the priest had predicted, genuinely invisible to him, his mentor revealed himself. The pallor, the hunger behind the eyes, the specific stillness of something that does not breathe out of necessity but out of habit. Movarth was turned in the same moment he understood that he had been hunted the entire time. What a person does with that, with the knowledge that the most sophisticated predator they ever tried to find had been standing behind them from the beginning, guiding them, developing them, and finally taking them, is a question the book does not answer. Movarth emerged from that encounter as a vampire and evidently spent a long time becoming very powerful, because by the time you meet him in his lair north of Morthal, he is a master vampire with a well-organized coven and a plan that demonstrates he has lost none of the strategic intelligence he had as a hunter. The plan is to take Morthal, not to attack it, to infiltrate it. He turned a Nord woman named Alva and sent her into the city with specific instructions. Seduce the men, turn the influential ones, let the infection spread slowly through the guard structure and the political leadership. By the time anyone realizes what is happening, the majority of Morthal's power structure will be answering to Movarth. The townsfolk become property. The city becomes a coven in the form of a town. It is, from a purely tactical standpoint, elegant. It reflects exactly the lesson that Movarth learned from the Vampirum order, that overt predation is vulnerable, that the approach which works is the one that looks like something else until it is too far along to counter. What disrupts it is fire. The house that Alva was using as her base burns, for reasons that the quest makes complicated, and the fire draws attention that the plan was not designed to survive. When you follow the trail to Movarth's lair, you find him waiting, not surprised, not panicked, but with the stillness of someone who has been in the situations this bad before and survived them by being more dangerous than the situation. His lair is cave-sized but cave-comfortable, which is the most unsettling version of comfortable. There are chairs, there is a table, there is food that will never be eaten. The aesthetics of a home built by someone who remembers what homes are supposed to look like and has replicated the form without any of the function, because none of the function is required. He fights with the intensity of a former Fighters Guild trainer who has had several hundred additional years of combat experience and the physical enhancement of vampirism. He is fast in the specific way that pure-blood vampires are fast. Not supernaturally fast in the cinematic sense, but fast in the sense that his reaction time is compressed to something that is genuinely difficult to counter without preparation. He will drain your health through vampiric spells while also attacking with weapons, and the combination requires you to be more aggressive than you might instinctively be against a spellcaster. The Dawnguard DLC adds a full taxonomy of vampire nobility that the base game only hinted at. Lord Harkon's clan, the Volkihar, are the specific vampires mentioned in Movarth's accounts of his hunting career. They are old in a way that puts most of Skyrim's old things to shame. Harkon himself was a king of men before he bargained for vampirism, an actual king, the leader of a human nation, who decided that the power of mortality was insufficient and traded his humanity for something he has been refining and expanding ever since. The Volkihar clan members in Castle Volkihar are individually significant encounters. Not all of them are hostile. Some are neutral, some are potential allies, some are in the specific state of barely restrained violence that defines vampire court politics. But the hostile ones, particularly in the context of choosing the Dawnguard side and assaulting the castle, are among the most powerful undead encounters in the game, each one carrying centuries of combat experience and the cold certainty that comes from having survived longer than most civilizations. The encounter with Vighar and Bloodlit Throne, a vampire clan leader in a cave near Falkreath, is one of the cleaner examples of what base game vampire lore looks like when it is focused and specific. Vighar is an old enough vampire that he barely remembers being human, and the lair he runs reflects this. There is no attempt at the domesticity of Movarth's place, no chairs or tables maintaining the form of mortal life. It is simply a space optimized for what vampires need, which turns out to be very different from what humans need once you remove the biological requirements that overlap. His bloodline, whether he is Volkihar or something older or something separate, is not specified by the game, but the power level suggests an antiquity that places him in the same broad category as Movarth, a vampire who has been vampire long enough that the distinction between what he was and what he is has become academic. Part 8. The college's hidden dangers, magic gone wrong, and the faces of recklessness. The College of Winterhold is Skyrim's institutional center of magical learning, and like all institutions, it contains multitudes. The official curriculum, the formal teaching relationships, the scheduled lectures between 1 in the afternoon and 3 in the afternoon that the masters dutifully hold while the world outside cracks and shifts. All of this is the surface of the college. Below it is a history of experiments that did not go as planned, of students and researchers who reached past their understanding into things they should not have touched, and of the specific consequences that Skyrim's magic accrues to people who do not pay attention. The Caller is one of the earliest college-adjacent hidden bosses you can encounter. She appears at a location called Felglow Keep, and the connection to the college is that she is, or was, a mage who had a working relationship with the college before that relationship ended badly. The exact nature of the ending is not specified with great clarity, but the keep she now occupies is full of captured mages, and her use of them suggests that whatever the college did or did not do, she has moved beyond any framework of institutional ethics into something more personal and considerably more dangerous. She is not undead. She is not Daedric. She is a living mage who is simply very powerful and very uninterested in anyone's welfare but her own, which in a world where magic can do what Skyrim's magic can do, makes her one of the more immediately threatening non-supernatural enemies in the game. Her fire spells are at the master tier. Her ability to sustain a fight is enhanced by a combination of restoration and the specific focus that comes from having made certain choices about what matters to you. Fighting her requires the same kind of adaptation that the best Skyrim fights require, reading the patterns, understanding which approach she counters and which she does not, choosing when to press and when to give ground. She dies in the way that people with ordinary mortality die, which after all the undead and Daedric encounters is almost shocking in its finality. The labyrinthian sequence of the college questline leads ultimately to Morokei, but the journey to him is its own encounter. Labyrinthian is vast. The ruins of Bromjunar, the old capital of the dragon cult, are extensive enough that the game represents them as multiple distinct zones, and moving through them involves a sequence of escalating challenges that Make it clear you are approaching something significant. The spectral echoes of Savos Aran's previous expedition appear as ghostly figures, reenacting the moments that led to the disaster. A storytelling technique that Skyrim uses rarely, but uses perfectly when it does. The ghostly dragon in Labyrinthian is one of the dungeon's hidden encounters. Not a named dragon, not a lore-significant creature, but a spectral manifestation of draconic energy that has been accumulating in the ruins for long enough to take draconic form. It fights differently from living dragons. It cannot be staggered in the same ways. Its resistance to certain damage types is elevated by its spectral nature, and the fog of Labyrinthian's deeper chambers makes the spatial relationship between you and the dragon harder to read than outdoor dragon fights allow. What makes it significant is the context. You are in the ruins of a city that was the political center of the civilization that worshipped dragons as gods, that built its entire governance structure around the hierarchical relationship between dragon and human, and the building is haunted by a dragon made of ghost energy. The whole of the dragon cult's history is compressed into that space, and the fight in it is a compressed version of the dragon war itself. One mortal, one dragon, in the ruins of the world they destroyed together. The Archmage Ancano, who is the final antagonist of the college quest line, is not hidden in the sense that most hidden bosses are hidden. His presence is visible from early in the quest line, his hostility telegraphed by his behavior and his dialogue. But the fight with him, at the peak of the college's tower, with the Eye of Magnus active and reality visibly fraying around him, has a quality that is different from other fights in the game. He cannot be harmed while the Eye of Magnus is active. The Staff of Magnus must be used to close the eye before damage can be dealt. This creates a combat sequence that does not play like a standard fight. It is more of a problem-solving exercise conducted under lethal pressure, which is an interesting design choice for a fight that exists inside what is nominally Skyrim's academic institution questline. Ancano himself is a Thalmor agent, and the Thalmor connection gives his antagonism a weight that extends beyond personal ambition. He is not simply a mage who wants power for himself. He is a representative of a political structure that the documents in the Thalmor embassy confirm is engaged in a multi-generational project of strategic destabilization. What Ancano wanted from the Eye of Magnus, what the Thalmor would have done with it, had the plan succeeded, is one of the questions the game leaves open and is the more frightening for it. The Staff of Magnus itself, which must be recovered from Labyrinthian before the final confrontation, is one of Skyrim's most lore-significant items. Magnus, the entity who designed the magical architecture of Mundus, who tore through reality to escape when the creation of the mortal world began draining divine energy, left the staff behind when he fled. A tool made to shape reality, left in the world that the shaping created. The implications of this for what the staff could be used for are large enough that the Sigic Order's decision to take the Eye of Magnus at the end of the questline begins to seem like basic prudence. The Augur of Dunlane, housed in the college's lowest sub-basement, is technically not a boss encounter at all. He is an information resource, a consciousness without a body that provides guidance during the questline. But his story is worth telling in this context because he represents the specific consequences of magical experimentation taken past sustainable limits. He was a student. He had a name, Dunlane. He had curiosity, which in a mage is a virtue until the precise moment it becomes a liability. The experiment that transformed him exceeded what his mortal form could process. The excess energy had to go somewhere, and where it went was everywhere simultaneously. His body dissolved, his consciousness expanded into the ambient magical energy of the sub-basement, and what remained was aware, communicative, and absolutely, permanently immovable. He has been there ever since, accumulating knowledge that passes through the magical field he occupies, answering questions that the students and masters bring him, watching the college from below. He is described as a resource. The framing of him as a resource rather than as a person who had a catastrophic accident and deserves some kind of response to that fact is the college's own ethical failure made visible. He did not choose this. He is not a ghost, because ghosts retain some relationship with death. He is something the living kept and use because the alternative is confronting what they did. Part 9. Dwemer Depths, ancient machines and what they guard. Thousands of years after the Dwemer vanished from Tamriel, in a single simultaneous moment that left their piles of ash in beds and chairs across every city they had ever built, their machines are still running. This is one of Skyrim's most philosophically interesting facts and one of its most useful gameplay features. Because Dwemer ruins are consistently the game's highest density encounter environments. Complex, layered, full of mechanisms and traps and the specific kind of violence that comes from things that are not alive but behave as though they are. The machines were built for specific functions. The spiders do maintenance and can be reprogrammed by inserting soul gems of specific types into their gear compartments. The spheres patrol, retract into their ball form when not engaged, and fight with a combination of ballistic attack and close-range combat that makes them harder to read than most purely melee enemies. And the Centurions, the largest, the most powerful, the final defense mechanism in Dwemer installations, were built to deal with threats that everything else had failed to stop. Every Dwemer ruin of significant size has a Centurion somewhere in its depths. The question is always what they are guarding. Tower of Mizark, the Dwemer structure that sits above Blackreach and contains the oculary mechanism that the main quest uses to decipher the Elder Scroll, has a Centurion in its lower levels. The oculary itself is one of the most remarkable pieces of Dwemer engineering visible in the game, an astronomical telescope of sorts, a device for focusing and translating the light of the Elder Scroll through a series of crystal lenses and moving mechanisms, built to extract information that exists only in the frequencies of light between visible spectrums. The intelligence required to design such a device is staggering, and the Centurion that guards the access to it is correspondingly powerful. The Centurion at the end of Mzulft, a Dwemer observatory east of Windhelm, guards a device called the Oculary's counterpart, a focusing lens that the college quest uses to assemble a map of magical anomalies across Skyrim. Mzulft is one of the larger Dwemer ruins in the game in terms of sheer spatial complexity, a research facility rather than a residential or industrial one, with laboratory spaces and calibration equipment that speaks to a level of scientific inquiry that makes most of what exists in the Fourth Era look primitive. Erkingthand, southwest of Windhelm, is the site of Mercer Frey's heist attempt and the location of the Eyes of the Falmer. It is enormous, one of the single largest dungeons in Skyrim, and it is divided between Dwemer constructs in the upper levels and Falmer in the lower ones, with the specific friction between those populations creating an encounter ecology that is unusual. The Falmer and the constructs do not cooperate. They fight each other in certain chambers, which creates opportunities for a patient player, but also creates a space where chaos is the operating condition, and predicting what happens next becomes genuinely difficult. The boss encounter at the end of Erkingthand, Mercer Frey himself, the head of the Thieves Guild turned traitor, is one of the game's best designed major boss fights, using the dungeon's architecture in ways that matter. Mercer can become invisible, which in a room with multiple access points and complex geometry creates a specific kind of hunting tension. He is skilled with one-handed weapons and highly resistant to detection-based counters. The fight feels less like the conventional end-of-dungeon challenge, and more like being hunted by someone significantly better at this than most of the people you fight. What Erkingthand adds to the Dwemer encounter canon is the sense of scale. The ruin extends down and down, each level deeper than the previous, the Falmer population thickening as the constructs become less frequent, the whole thing reading like a geological record of occupation. Dwemer at the top, Falmer pressure from below, the two meeting somewhere in the middle levels in a standoff that has been going on since the Dwemer vanished and left their machines running without direction. The Falmer warmongers, the highest tier Falmer enemies found in the deepest Dwemer ruins, are worth specific discussion here because they represent the ceiling of Falmer capability and the floor of what the Snow Elves once were. The Falmer are the most thoroughly tragic creatures in Skyrim, a sophisticated civilization that fled underground after military defeat, accepted an offer of sanctuary from the Dwemer that turned into enslavement, were blinded with a poison that corrupted their biology permanently, and over countless generations of dark and underground existence, lost everything that had made them Snow Elves. The Warmongers fight with Falmer-specific weapons, bone and chitin constructions, that are effective despite their crude materials, shaped by people who have been solving the problem of making weapons with whatever is underground for a very long time. They are fast and aggressive and large, larger than the standard Falmer, and they hit with a force that does not correspond to their visual appearance. They are not the snow elves they came from. But neither are they simply monsters, and the lore that connects them to that lost civilization gives every fight with a Falmer a context that is more complicated than most enemies provide. The Deep Dwemer ruins also contain dwarven ballista bosses, introduced in the Dragonborn DLC for Skyrim's Anniversary Edition, which are essentially giant stationary combat constructs that the Dwemer designed for high-volume threat neutralization. Their projectiles are powerful enough to knock you off your feet even at high levels, and their placement in dungeon bottlenecks means that bypassing them requires either destroying them at range, which is slow and expensive in terms of resources, or finding the Dwemer engineering that controls them, which is always less obvious than it looks. Calcelmo's laboratory in Markarth, which is adjacent to Nashuan Zell and functionally continuous with it, contains records of Dwemer engineering that shed light on the mechanical principles behind the automaton technology. His research has been ongoing for decades without reaching conclusions, which says something about the complexity of what he is trying to understand. The Dwemer did not simply build machines, they created systems, interconnected networks of mechanism and sound and resonance that operated on principles that mortal engineering has not yet rediscovered. Part 10. The Guild Depths, Thieves and Killers, and What They Protect. The Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood occupy a particular category of Skyrim institution. They are criminal, obviously, in the narrow legal sense that the holds recognize. But they are also old enough that their age itself is a kind of legitimacy, or at least a kind of stability that the legitimate institutions of Skyrim cannot always claim. The hidden encounters within the guild quest lines are different in character from the standard dungeon bosses. They are personal in a way that most of Skyrim's combat is not. You are not fighting something that was waiting in a room for the next mortal to come through the door, but specific individuals whose hostility toward you is located in specific events and choices. Within the Thieves Guild's Ragged Flagon, buried in Riften's Ratway, there is a particular kind of safety that the guild provides and that creates, as its counterpart, a specific kind of danger. The Ratway itself, the hidden tunnels beneath Riften that connect the Ragged Flagon to the surface, is patrolled by people who have elected to live underground rather than in the city above. Some of them are there because they are hiding from something. Some of them are there because the city above has no use for them. Some of them are simply unstable in ways that make underground dwelling more comfortable than the alternative. Droff and Hunan Black Skeever, encountered in the Ratway shortly after entering it, represent the lower tier of the threats you find there, ambitious enough to try ambushing people in the Ratway, skilled enough to survive there, not quite skilled enough to be doing anything more sophisticated than this. But beyond them, the specific threat of Conjakar, a Breton warrior in the Ratway whose presence is part of a personal conflict with someone connected to the guild, illustrates how the Ratway is a space where multiple independent criminal stories exist in the same physical space. The broader Thieves Guild quest introduces Mercer Frey, who has already been discussed in the context of Irkungthand. But within the guild itself, before the betrayal plot becomes visible, the encounters in the guild's peripheral operations, the heist at Golden Glow Estate, the jewelry exchange at Honningbrew Meadery, the deeper operations in Riften's political structure, each have boss-level opponents who are protecting something specific and who fight with the specificity that protection implies. Maven Blackbriar, who the script's source material describes accurately as the person who actually runs Riften regardless of what the official political structure says, is technically not a boss encounter in the sense that you can fight her within the game's framework without significant consequence. She is essential to several quest lines and cannot be permanently killed. But the power she represents and the specific encounters that her network generates make her the shadow boss of the entire Riften region, the shape behind the visible shapes. Within the Dark Brotherhood, the Dawnstar Sanctuary introduces Udafrikti, an ice troll of unusual size and disposition who has made himself at home in the sanctuary's lower levels and who has lineage extending through Morrowind's Blood Moon expansion. Udafrikti's mother terrorized a location in that game, and Oblivion, his grandmother, made an appearance there. This is a creature with a multi-generational Elder Scrolls history, which is remarkable for an ice troll, and the fight with him at the Dawnstar Sanctuary is one of those encounters that rewards players who have been paying attention to the series across its iterations. He is large, as ice trolls are, and his regeneration rate is higher than average, a design feature of Udafrykte specifically, and not of regular trolls in the Brotherhood's basement. Fire kills the regeneration and makes the fight manageable. Not having fire makes the fight a prolonged and increasingly uncomfortable exchange of attrition. The Brotherhood's contract system, the mechanism by which the organization receives jobs from clients who perform the Black Sacrament, generates quest content that often features boss-level targets. The specific assassination contracts in the main Brotherhood quest line are named individuals with personal histories and combat capabilities that distinguish them from the generic targets of Radiant quests. Vittoria Vici, whose assassination at her own wedding is one of the game's most memorable single-quest moments, is not herself a combat encounter. But her guards are extremely high quality, and the difficulty of completing the assassination without detection makes the encounter design feel like a boss fight, even though the target is not one. The Night Mother's Quiffen and the specific encounter with Cicero that the Brotherhood questline allows, the potential boss fight with the Keeper, should you choose to kill him at the Falkreath Sanctuary, is one of the more emotionally complex optional fights in Skyrim. Cicero is one of the most individually written NPCs in the game, a figure whose madness has specific causes, and whose loyalty to the Night Mother is absolute in a way that makes him genuinely dangerous. Fighting him means knowing that you are fighting the last practitioner of the Brotherhood's oldest traditions, the man who preserved the organization through the long years when he was its only member. The potential irony of killing the Brotherhood's most faithful servant while trying to rebuild the Brotherhood is not lost on the writing. Part 11. DLC, Depths, Deeps, Dawnguard, Dragonborn, and the bosses at the edges of the world. The Dawnguard DLC opens with the return of the vampires as an organized political force, and the vampire bosses within it are scaled accordingly. But the most interesting hidden encounters in Dawnguard are the ones that do not belong to the main quest line, the ones that exist in the periphery of the Dawnguard conflict and reward exploration beyond the quest arrows. In the Soul Cairn, beyond the Reaper encounter already described, there are 3 keepers, giant skeletal warriors who patrol the outer perimeter of the cairn and who must be defeated to access the boneyard where Valerica is imprisoned. The keepers are not hidden in the traditional sense. The Dawnguard questline tells you about them and requires you to fight them, but the quality of those fights is worth discussing specifically. Each keeper is enormous, scaled to be visually imposing in a landscape where the scale of everything is already large. They move with a patient deliberateness that suits their role as eternal guardians of a boundary between one part of the Soul Cairn and another. They do not rush, they do not panic. They have been doing this for long enough that urgency would be strange to them. Their weapons are massive and they swing them with the economy of repetition, not grace exactly, but the efficiency of something that has done this particular motion so many times that it no longer requires thought. Defeating all 3 opens the path to Valerica, who is herself an encounter of the interesting kind, a person who made choices that are defensible from her perspective and indefensible from others. Imprisoned in a dimension she engineered her own incarceration in as a protective measure, who you need information from and who needs something from you in return. The negotiation of that exchange, in the middle of the Soul Cairn while the ideal Master's crystals pulse overhead, is one of Dawnguard's better character scenes. Lord Harkin himself is the Dawnguard's climactic boss encounter, and fighting him in the entrance hall of Castle Volkihar, a hall built to impress and to intimidate, with a scale that makes the combat space enormous and the ceiling lost in shadow, is exactly as dramatic as the questline's build-up promises. He transforms. He heals from absorbed blood. He uses shouts. He fills the space with the certainty of someone who has been in that castle for so long that it is not just his home but an extension of himself. And disturbing it disturbs him in a way that makes him angrier and therefore more dangerous as the fight progresses. The connection between Harkon's defeat and the theological implications of Oriel's bow, the elven artifact of the dragon god of time, which in the Dawnguard lore is used either to darken the sun or to purify it, adds a dimension to the final combat that goes beyond simple boss fight. What you are doing at the end of Dawnguard is not simply killing a powerful vampire. You are adjudicating a question about whether the sun belongs to everyone or can be claimed by specific interests, and the answer to that question has cosmic implications that the game gestures toward without fully articulating. Moving to the Dragonborn DLC and the island of Solstheim, The hidden boss encounters there are among the deepest hidden in all of Skyrim's content. Miraak has already been described in the earlier research summary, but the specific quality of his reveal in the Black Book Waking Dreams deserves fuller treatment. When you first enter Apocrypha through that book, you arrive in a space that is neither Tamriel nor any Oblivion realm you have previously encountered, an endless library of forbidden knowledge, lit by a sickly green luminescence, where the floors and walls are made of wet stone, and the paths between shelves twist in ways that suggest the space rearranges itself. And at the end of the path that the Black Book places you on, standing with his back to you, is a figure in strange armor with a tentacled mask. He turns. He acknowledges you with the specific condescension of someone who has been waiting for this moment, and is disappointed that the person who finally arrived is not more impressive. His opening dialogue makes clear that he is aware of you, aware of what you are, and considers your arrival more as an inconvenience than a threat. He has had thousands of years of practice waiting. He can afford to be unimpressed. The actual boss fight with Miraak comes at the summit of Apocrypha, one of the final quests of the Dragonborn storyline. What makes it mechanically unusual is the Dragon Soul mechanic. Miraak will absorb the souls of dragons you kill during the fight, using them to heal himself completely. He can do this multiple times, and until you understand the mechanic, the fight feels like it has no solution. You kill a dragon, he heals, you are further ahead than before the kill, but further behind than you need to be. The solution requires killing dragons fast enough and pressing Miraak hard enough in the windows between heals that you can actually deplete his health before he can access another soul. It is the only fight in Skyrim where the primary mechanic is managing the tempo of soul absorption, and it makes the fight feel genuinely different from everything that precedes it. When Miraak dies, Hermaeus Mora kills him personally, the Daedric Prince of Knowledge reaching into the fight from his own realm and eliminating his former champion before the player can absorb the soul. This is Mora establishing that no one, including the person who just won, escapes his realm without paying. The player absorbs Miraak's soul anyway, because Mora permits it, which means the player leaves Apocrypha as someone who just absorbed the soul of the most powerful Dragonborn who ever lived. The implications of that are large, and the game does not fully pursue them, which is its right. Karstag, the Frost Giant, was introduced in Morrowind's Blood Moon expansion as the ruler of a castle of ice on Solstheim's northern coast. He was killed by the Nerevarine during Hircine's hunt, taken as prey in the divine hunt that Hircine organizes when the blood moon rises over Solstheim. He died in the hunt's maze beneath the Mortrag Glacier, which subsequently collapsed. Over 200 years passed. When the Dragonborn arrives in Solstheim in the Fourth Era, Karstag's castle is ruins. The Reeklings, small goblin-like creatures native to Solstheim who served him in life, still occupy the ruins, which suggests a loyalty that survived even the complete deterioration of the structure they served in. In a glacial cave to the northeast of Saring's Watch, embedded in the ice wall like a geological feature, is a frost giant's skull. No quest tells you it is there. No NPC mentions it. It is simply present, in the ice, waiting for someone to notice. Taking the skull to the ruined throne in Castle Karstag ruins and placing it on the throne summons Karstag's ghost. He is a level 90 enemy, which places him above the Ebony Warrior in raw level terms and makes him the single hardest encounter in all of Skyrim's base game and DLC content. His health pool is nearly double the Ebony Warrior's. He hits like the structural collapse of a large building. He generates a permanent frost cloak of significant radius that deals constant damage to anything nearby. He summons ice wraiths. He can trigger blizzards. He can ragdoll you with a stomp that has the force of a dragon shout. There is no quest completion marker when you kill him. The game acknowledges the event by giving you the ability to summon Karstag's ghost in combat 3 times before the ability expires. 3 summons of a level 90 frost giant, the hardest fight in the game translated into a 3-use tactical resource. He was there in Morrowind. He returned in Skyrim. Whatever the Reeklings have been preserving his skull for, with their loyalty that outlasted his death and the collapse of his castle and 2 centuries of ice, it was this. Part 12. The rarest and most hidden. Bosses that almost nobody finds. This is the final section, and it contains the encounters that even dedicated players miss. The ones hidden not simply behind optional quest triggers or distant locations, but behind the specific combination of curiosity, luck, and pattern recognition that Skyrim rewards when it rewards anything. Volthuriol has been mentioned in the introduction and deserves his full story here. Blackreach is an underground city of impossible scale, geologically wrong, architecturally magnificent, lit by bioluminescent mushrooms and a false sun that the Dwemer built and hung from the cavern's ceiling, illuminating a space that should be dark. It is the pinnacle of what the Dwemer achieved. A city built under a city, running without power or maintenance or any of the things that cities normally need. In the 21st century of the Fourth Era, as functional as it was when its builders lived in it. At the center of Blackreach, above the debate hall and the Hall of Rumination, hangs the yellow orb. It is clearly artificial. No stalactite formation produces a perfect sphere of bright amber light. The Dwemer made it. Why they made it is not stated anywhere in the game, though theories range from a navigational landmark for Blackreach's residents to a component of the tonal architecture that keeps the underground space stable. If you use the unrelenting force shout on the orb, which requires both knowing that the Thu'um can interact with inanimate objects in this way and specifically choosing to try it on this particular object, the orb resonates. A deep tone fills Blackreach. The mushrooms seem to respond, and from the direction of the cavern's southern reaches, where the light does not quite reach, comes the sound of massive wings. Volthuriol's name means Dark Overlord Fire in the dragon tongue. He is a dragon who has been in Blackreach, alive, for an unknown number of years. He is not one of Alduin's resurrections. The main quest logic of Alduin raising his old lieutenants does not apply to Volthuriol. He is simply there, in the dark underground, alive and apparently content to stay there. How he got there is one of Skyrim's genuinely unanswered questions. Did he enter Blackreach before the Dwemer vanished, drawn by the warmth and the size of the space? Did he seek refuge underground during the Dragon War, hiding from the systematic hunting that the Nordic heroes conducted? Did the Dwemer bring him there deliberately, as a guard or a subject of study or a power source for the tonal architecture? The speculation that he was raised from an egg by the Dwemer, that they found a dragon egg and kept it, that Volthuriol grew to adulthood in Blackreach and never learned to truly fly because there was never room, is unprovable but resonant. It would explain why he does not take flight during the fight. He crawls on the ground for the entire encounter, using fire breath as his primary weapon. A dragon that has never had sky, a creature of air made permanent resident of the deepest earth. He is fixed at level 50, always, regardless of the player's level. This means he is a genuine danger to players who find him early, and an interesting challenge for players who find him at higher levels when most other encounters have scaled past the point of real threat. He cannot be tamed with the Bend Will shout, because Blackreach is not registered as a valid world space for dragon taming. He can only be summoned once, which is unusual. Most encounters in Skyrim can be repeated on dungeon reset, but Volthuriol's summon is unique and permanent. Kill him or do not. He will not appear again. The Ebony Warrior arrives without warning. At level 80, if you have the Dragonborn DLC installed, you may enter a major city and find a Redguard in full ebony armor waiting for you. He has been waiting, by the game's design logic, since you reached level 80, not literally standing in the city forever, but placed there with the specific patience of a mechanic that has been watching your progress and selected this moment as the correct one. He has a conversation for you. He has done everything. There is nothing left. No villain he has not defeated, no quest he has not completed, no challenge that the world has been able to offer him that he has not already answered. He is the Dragonborn's mirror, a mortal who reached the ceiling of mortal achievement and found it insufficient. He does not want to continue living in a world he has already mastered. He wants the one thing the world has not yet given him. He wants to go to Sovngarde. Sovngarde is the Nordic warrior's paradise. Not simply a reward for living well or dying peacefully, but specifically for dying in worthy combat. It is the destination that Nordic culture has always oriented its greatest honors toward. The idea that how you die matters as much as how you live, that the ultimate expression of a warrior's life is an ending that the warriors of Sovngarde will recognize as their kind of ending. The Ebony Warrior has achieved everything in life. He needs someone to give him this death. There is a complication. He is a Redguard, and Sovngarde is specifically a Norse warrior's paradise. The Redguard afterlife. If the Red Guard have a specific afterlife in the Elder Scrolls cosmology, is something different. Whether the Ebony Warrior knows this and does not care, or does not know and genuinely believes Sovngarde will accept him, or is using Sovngarde as a convenient framing for a death wish that does not require theological accuracy, is left entirely to the player to decide. He meets you at his last vigil in the Velothi Mountains, a campsite with a fire and, it must be said, extraordinary views. He has chosen the location carefully, as he has chosen everything carefully. The fight is the most mechanically challenging non-quest combat in the base game. He uses shouts. He has elemental resistance across the board. His armor is essentially impenetrable to low damage. He uses restoration. He is patient in the way that a fighter who has done this for a very long time becomes patient. He does not rush. He does not panic. He adapts without apparent effort to whatever you are doing. When he dies well. Whatever the cosmological reality of his destination, the fight itself was exactly what he wanted it to be. There is a woman in the mountains southwest of Riverwood, whose story has already been told in this script's first section, but the category she represents, the hidden challenge concealed in the mundane surface of Skyrim's landscape, leads naturally to a broader inventory of the rarest encounters. Potema Septim, the Wolf Queen of Solitude, returns in ghost form through the quest, The Wolf Queen Awakened, activated after completing the main quest for Solitude. She was one of the most powerful and destructive rulers in Tamriel's history, a necromancer of extraordinary ability who allied with undead armies and caused civil war through sheer force of will and magical capacity. Her ghost, summoned by a cult working in the Pelagius wing of the Blue Palace and then in the crypts beneath Solitude, is scaled to her reputation. The fight with her final form, after her cult has been working to restore her to full power for the duration of the quest line, is one of the most atmospheric single boss fights in the game, in a crypt beneath Skyrim's most politically significant city, against a figure whose shadow reaches across centuries of history. She was the mother of Pelagius the Mad, the emperor whose disturbing mental instability is explored in a completely different Skyrim questline. She was the instigator of wars that are still remembered 2 centuries later. She is, in the context of Skyrim's history, an enormous figure. The fight in the crypt is the most you will ever get to touch that enormity. The last hidden boss worth naming before this script closes is the one that most of all rewards the player who has paid attention to the whole. In the Labyrinthian, in the Chamber of the Wooden Mask, collecting all 8 Dragon Priest masks and wearing them together in that specific location summons Konahrik, a golden dragon priest mask floating above the Bramjunar shrine, and wearing it triggers the appearance of a final dragon priest. Not one of the named 8. Something else. Konahrik means warlord in the dragon tongue, and what appears when it is summoned is a dragon priest who is stronger than any of the 8 individually, combining elements of all their combat styles. The lore connection is that Konahrik was the mask of coordination, the artifact that allowed the 8 dragon priests to function as a council, that represented their collective authority, that bound their individual obligations to the hierarchy into something larger than any one of them. When you collect all 8 masks and stand in the place where the council met, you are reenacting something that happened in the Merethic era, bringing all 8 powers back together in the capital of the dragon cult civilization, in the specific chamber built for their meetings. And the world responds to that reenactment by producing the ghost of the institution itself. You defeat it. The mask is yours. You carry the emblem of a civilization's collective power in your inventory, and most players who do not read the lore closely will wear it for its combat bonuses and never fully register what they are carrying. That is, in the end, Skyrim's deepest design philosophy. The world keeps its deepest secrets casually. It does not announce them. It puts them in your path, or near your path, or in places visible from your path, and it waits for you to be the kind of traveler who looks. The fire is getting low now. Outside, the wind has settled into the long, steady sound of a night that has no particular urgency. You have walked a long way tonight, through crypts and frozen peaks and underground cities that should not exist, past bosses who have been waiting for lifetimes for someone who knew where to look. You have met them. You have let their stories settle. This world is bigger than any single journey through it. There are still things in it that have not been found. There are bosses and locations that have been missed in all the years since Skyrim was released. Encounters whose conditions have not been met. doors that were never opened because the person who reached them was looking at something else. Somewhere in those mountains is a word wall with no one standing near it. Somewhere in those ruins is a sarcophagus that has not been opened. Somewhere under that city is a city. Sleep well, cozy traveler. The road will be there in the morning. And if this helped you rest, if any part of these stories gave your mind somewhere soft to settle while the weight of the real world lifted for a little while, please like this video and subscribe. It means more than I can say. Every comment, every like, every new subscriber is another reason to keep making these. Leave a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching from, and what time it is there, and what you want to explore next. I read every single one. Rest now, Skyrim will wait. Thank you for watching. Sweet dreams, cozy nights. Part 13. The texture of waiting, what these encounters mean. There is a question that surfaces when you spend enough time cataloging the hidden bosses of Skyrim, a question that the game itself seems to be asking, underneath all of its explicit storytelling. Why does a world preserve its most dangerous things so carefully? The dragon priests sealed in their tombs, Otar locked behind the vigil of two men who turned themselves into ghosts, Karstag's skull held in the ice by Reeklings, who kept a faith through 2 centuries of institutional collapse, the Pale Lady sealed by a sword, Hevnorak imprisoned by a ritual that required a living guardian to maintain it indefinitely. The answer the world gives, if you listen to all of it together, is that power does not disappear. It persists. It waits. The mistake that people make is assuming that because something has been sealed, or buried, or drowned, or imprisoned, it has been resolved. The ruins of Skyrim are the accumulated record of everything that was too dangerous to destroy and too persistent to die, sealed away by people who understood that the best they could do was delay the reckoning, and hope the reckoning would land in some era better equipped to handle it than their own. It landed in yours. There is something specifically interesting about the architectural choices that different cultures in Skyrim made when they needed to seal something away. The Nords built their dragon priest tombs with layers, Draugr guardians, puzzles requiring specific knowledge, word walls that only the Dovahkiin can fully benefit from. There is an embedded assumption in this design that the person who reaches the dragon priest will have the power to deal with them. The dungeons are not traps, they are tests. The Dwemer approach was different. Their constructs run indefinitely, and they do not care about your level. The centurion in the back of a Dwemer ruin does not become less lethal because you have grown. It is what it is. The Dwemer built for eternity, and their idea of eternal security was simply mechanisms that work, indefinitely, without requiring the kind of judgment that would allow them to distinguish between an appropriate visitor and an inappropriate one. Everything is an intruder. Everything is met with the same response. This distinction tells you something about the philosophies. The Nords believed in worthy adversaries. They built systems that filtered by capability, that rewarded the person strong enough to pass. The Dwemer believed in perfect execution. They built systems that did not negotiate. The Falmer, in the depths of the Dwemer ruins, are the outcome of the Dwemer's approach applied to people. The Snow Elves were processed. They were modified to be dependent. Then they were released into the darkness where the dependency would ensure compliance. The result was not compliance. The result was the gradual loss of everything that had made them Snow Elves, over generations so long that no individual alive can remember the transition. The Falmer are not angry about what happened to them. They do not have the context to be angry about it. They are simply what the Dwemer's processing produced, and they exist in the ruins of the civilization that created them with no understanding of the relationship. That is perhaps the most disturbing hidden story in all of Skyrim's dungeon content. Not a boss in the combat sense, just the ongoing presence of a people who were unmade by engineering, still living in the unmade place, still fighting with the tools they learned to make in the dark. The encounters with Falmer warmongers, the highest tier Falmer, the ones who fight with a skill and ferocity that exceeds what their degraded forms would seem to allow, are interesting in this context. They are the best at what they are. Whatever the Dwemer's process reduced them to, within that reduction, specific individuals have developed toward mastery. They are the peaks of a diminished mountain range, and fighting them, in the ruins where their ancestors sought sanctuary and found slavery, carries a weight that is distinct from fighting any other enemy in the game. Let us go somewhere specific and quiet for a while. There is a lighthouse on the northwestern coast of Skyrim, between Dawnstar and Solitude, called Frostflow Lighthouse. It is not attached to any main quest line. There is no arrow pointing to it. It is simply there on the coast, white and cold against the gray water, looking like it should be functional, and looking somehow like it has not been functional for a long time. Inside, you find a family, or what remains of a family. The father is dead, the mother is dead, the daughter is dead. The son is somewhere below, in the caves that connect the lighthouse basement to a Falmer nest, apparently having gone down to rescue his family and found them in a condition that the journals and the architecture make clear. The journals are scattered through the Sant Ayin-hus in an order that builds the story incrementally. The family came here to tend the lighthouse, to make a fresh start, to live the simple and respectable life of people who keep the lights burning for ships. And then something came up from below. There is no boss fight in Frostflow Lighthouse in the traditional sense. There is the Chorus Reaper in the deepest part of the caves, a large and aggressive Chorus, the insectoid creatures that the Falmer keep and breed, that represents the apex predator of the underground ecosystem beneath the lighthouse. And there is Frostflow Abyss Quest, which finds its resolution in the specific horror of what happened to the sun. What makes Frostflow Lighthouse one of the most remembered locations in Skyrim is the restraint of its storytelling. It does not tell you everything. It shows you enough. The journals are incomplete, not because the family stopped writing, but because writing stops when writing is no longer possible. The lighthouse itself is immaculate above ground and catastrophic below. The gap between the two is where the story lives. After you clear the Chorus and find everything there is to find, the lighthouse lantern can be lit. The fire at the top of the tower sends its signal out over the water, exactly as it was supposed to do. The family that was supposed to tend it is gone, but the light works. The ships will be safer, whatever that means in the context of what happened here. This is the hidden dimension of Skyrim's hidden encounters, that some of the most affecting things are not fights at all, but investigations. The boss is sometimes not a creature or an ancient dead thing, but the story itself, the assembled picture of what happened in a place before you arrived. Part 14. Deeper context. The lore behind what you fight, to understand why the dragon priests fight with such sustained ferocity. It helps to understand what they are in the most fundamental sense. They are not simply powerful undead mages. They are anchored. The masks they wear are not decorative. They are the physical repositories of the power the dragons granted their priests in the Merethic era. The masks hold the essence of the specific relationship between a given priest and their dragon patron. As long as the mask exists, the priest cannot fully die. They persist in a state that is not quite life and not quite death, suspended in the cold of their tombs, waiting. This is why the collection of all 8 masks and the subsequent summoning of Conarik at Labyrinthian is lore mechanically significant. The masks are fragments of a completed system. The dragon cult was a functioning governance structure, with the priests serving as the administrative layer between the dragons and the mortal population. Bringing the 8 masks together in the place where the priests once met to resolve their master's territorial disputes recreates, for a moment, the energy of that institution. The golden mask that appears is not a specific priest's remaining essence. It is the institution's own ghost. The practical mechanics of the Conarik mask itself, which can summon spectral dragon priests to fight alongside you when you are severely damaged, and which occasionally heals you and damages nearby enemies simultaneously, encode the mask's lore function into its gameplay function. The warlord's role was to coordinate. The mask coordinates still, just with a different definition of which side deserves the coordination. The dragon language is worth thinking about in this context. The word walls that are scattered across Skyrim, carved in the dragon tongue, are not educational resources left by pedagogues who wanted future generations to have access to the Thu'um. They are monuments. They mark places where significant things happened, where the words have been spoken enough and with enough power that they have settled into the stone, where the resonance of their original pronunciation can be read out of the rock face by someone with the specific gift of a dragonborn. The dragon language creates reality, as the transcript source material puts it. When you learn a word of power from a wall, you are not learning a representation of the word. You are directly absorbing the reality-shaping potential that the word encodes. This is why the Greybeard's method of teaching is so careful. They give you words one at a time in controlled circumstances, ensuring that the integration of each word's reality-altering potential happens in a context where it can be managed. What does it mean that the greatest repository of these words is carved across the landscape in the ruins of battles and ceremonies? It means that Skyrim's geography is, in the most literal possible sense, a record of every significant moment in its history. Every word wall is a place where something mattered enough to put words in the stone. The distribution of word walls across the holds is a map of the Dragon War, of the battles where tongues proved that mortals could resist draconic tyranny, of the ceremonies where the dragon cult affirmed its power. And every boss that guards a word wall, every dragon priest beside a wall, every dragon circling above one, is that history's final defender. The companion's connection to the hidden boss encounters is worth exploring in its specific form. The companions are the oldest continuously operating organization in Tamriel, as the source material notes, founded as a retribution army after the Night of Tears massacre, and evolved over millennia into something more complicated and more neutral. Volun Rude's Kvenel the Tongue represents the companion's own history, the era of the tongues, before Jurgen Windcaller's philosophy changed how the Thu'um was understood, when the voice was a standard military tool rather than a sacred discipline to be used only in moments of absolute necessity. Kvenel's tomb and the tradition around it, the requirement that his ceremonial weapons serve as keys, that you prove some level of engagement with his history before the inner sanctum opens, is a design that respects its own lore. You cannot simply batter your way past the puzzle door to reach him. You have to find his weapons. You have to understand, at least mechanically, what those weapons were and why they mattered. The engagement with the history is a condition of the encounter. There is a similar logic in the Highgate Ruins quest, where Anska has spent years researching a genealogical connection she believes exists and needs your help to confirm it. The quest does not exist to give you access to Vokun alone. You could bypass the quest entirely and enter the ruins without it. The quest exists to give the encounter context, to make Vokun something more than a strong enemy in a dungeon, by embedding him in a story about lineage and scholarship, and the specific human desire to know where you come from. This is Skyrim's greatest strength as a game world. The hidden bosses are not simply difficult optional content. They are the load-bearing walls of the world's history. Each one exists where they are because of specific events, specific choices, specific failures of resolution that left something powerful alive and waiting. To fight them is to participate in the historical record. To understand them is to understand why the world is the shape it is. Part 15. The in-between places, lesser-known encounters that deserve more attention. Between the major hidden bosses and the fully documented encounters of the main quests, there is a category of Skyrim enemy that gets discussed less than it deserves. The named and unique individuals who appear in specific locations, under specific conditions, and who carry stories that exceed their apparent significance. Taran Dreth is a Dunmer mage who can be encountered at multiple locations across Skyrim as a random encounter. Bidar. He travels with 3 hired mercenaries, and he will attack you if you have completed the Ethereum Shard questline. His significance is that he is believed to be the author of the Ethereum Wars, a scholarly text about Dwemer history, who plagiarized his research from Katria, the ghost who assists you through the quest. He is not difficult to defeat, and his encounter can be missed entirely if you do not travel in areas where he spawns. But his presence is the game's way of closing a loop in the Ethereum questline that the questline itself does not close. Katria is dead. She cannot confront him. She cannot get credit. The Dragonborn can, if they happen to run into him. The encounter with Taran Dreth is Skyrim doing what it does quietly and well, creating a world where things that happened have ongoing consequences that can be discovered out of order and at any time. Umana and Sulla Trebadius are 2 survivors of an expedition to Alftand, a major Dwemer ruin that connects to Black Reach. The expedition was a disaster. Everyone else died, and by the time you reach the pair deep inside Alftand, they have turned on each other over what little loot remains. They will fight you if you intervene, or they will fight each other until one wins and then fight you. The journals of the expedition, distributed throughout Alftand's chambers, document the dissolution of a scholarly enterprise into desperation in enough detail that you can feel the timeline of the catastrophe. Alftand is another Dwemer ruin with excellent environmental storytelling, and another Dwemer ruin that ends in a Centurion encounter, The Auftand Animonculori's final chamber has a dwarven centurion that has presumably been standing there since the expedition first attracted its attention. The relationship between Auftand and Blackreach is important for a specific reason. Auftand is one of the primary surface access points to Blackreach, and the expedition's goal was to reach the inner Dwemer city. They reached it. The notes do not record whether anyone got further than the first Blackreach chambers before the Falmer and the machines finished what the attrition of the expedition had started. Among the more poignant minor unique encounters in Skyrim is the one at Hilgrun's tomb, where a man named Goldir is standing outside a family tomb that has been taken over by a necromancer named Vals Veron. Vals Veron has been using the tomb's ancient bodies, Goldir's ancestors, as material for his experiments, and Goldir is both enraged and frightened in the specific way that people are enraged and frightened when the thing being violated is personal rather than abstract. Vals Veron is not a particularly powerful boss in the mechanical sense. He is a mid-level necromancer with conjuration abilities and the standard toolkit of someone who works in darkness, raising things that should stay down. But the context of the fight, in the catacombs of a family tomb, surrounded by the animated remains of the man standing outside waiting for you to sort it out, with the specific intimacy of desecration rather than simple violence, makes it land differently than fighting the same enemy type in a more generic location. The resolution of the quest, which involves clearing the tomb, has a specific quiet note. Goldir will stay if you tell him to, or come with you if you ask. He is not a particularly strong follower, but the offer exists, and the offer exists because of what happened in that tomb. And accepting it means carrying the aftermath of someone else's grief into wherever you go next. There is a cave in the rift called Lost Tongue Overlook that is guarded by a dragon whose name, Nahagliiv, meaning fury-burning hate in the dragon tongue, is worth knowing because it suggests something about the state of every named dragon Alduin resurrects: fury, burning, hate. These are not incidental adjectives. They are the essence of what comes back when Alduin reaches into the burial mound and reverses the death that ended these creatures' first lives. They are not restored to who they were. They are restored to a state that prioritizes the qualities that make them useful for Alduin's purposes. Nahagliiv is not a hidden boss in the standard sense. He is on the top of a specific mountain, and fighting him is optional, but not obscure. What is worth noting is his location near the old ruins of the Overlook, which suggests that before the Dragon War ended, this specific clifftop was significant enough to have buildings on it. Those buildings are crumbling now. Nahagliiv has been sleeping under the mountain for the 1,000 years since the Dragon War. When he wakes into ruins. Every named dragon that Alduin resurrects wakes into ruins. Their temples are collapsed. Their priests are dust, or undead things barely recognizable as the people those priests were. Their mortal worshippers are gone into the centuries. The world they were resurrected into has no place for them, and the fury and hate that their names encode is in part the specific fury of creatures who remember being at the center of everything and wake to find that everything has moved on without them. This is not sympathy. It is simply the texture of what Skyrim's named dragons are, and it changes the quality of the encounters with them, from simple dragon fights into something with a weight of history behind it. Part 16. Closing the circle, what the darkness keeps. The fire has gone down to coals now. Not out, just lower. The kind of fire that has found its sustainable level, that will hold through the rest of the night without needing more wood, casting that amber low light that makes everything in the room soft and warm and slightly unfocused at the edges. Let us finish where we began, with the idea that Skyrim hides its most interesting things in the places that look most ordinary. The old woman outside Riverwood, the cave south of Dawnstar with a forest growing inside it, the bandit camp with a word wall in the back, the orb in Blackreach that a dragon has been sleeping beside for 1,000 years, the skull in the glacier, the warrior at level 80, standing in a city, just waiting. None of these announce themselves. None of them have markers. They exist in the world with the same casual presence that everything else exists in the world. A tree is a tree, a mountain is a mountain, a cave is a cave, until suddenly they are not. Until you look at them with the specific quality of attention that transforms ordinary into extraordinary. That quality of attention is the thing that all the hidden encounters in Skyrim are rewarding when they reward anything. Not skill in combat, not level, not equipment. The attention that notices the orb and wonders what it does. The attention that reads the journal left on the floor next to the skeleton and follows the implications. The attention that does not pass by the old woman's house without looking inside. The Greybeards understand something about this. Their monastery at High Hrothgar is not decorated or ornamented in any way that would make it visually interesting from a distance. It is functional, cold, bare. The experience of climbing the 7,000 steps to reach it is intentionally long and intentionally uncomfortable. By the time you arrive at the door, you have been thinking about what is behind it for the entire climb, and the specificity of that thinking, the attention sustained over a long, cold journey, has prepared you for what the Greybeards have to teach in a way that simply being teleported there would not. The hidden bosses of Skyrim work on the same principle. The process of finding them is part of the encounter. Volthuriol is not simply a level 50 dragon you fight in Blackreach. He is the specific reward of the person who looked at the orb and thought, "I wonder what the Thu'um would do to that." The Reaper is not simply a difficult enemy in the Soul Cairn. He is the reward of the person who wandered the purple wasteland long past the point where the quest was finished, who collected 3 fragments of something without knowing what they would do, who placed them on an altar in a lair that was not even technically a room. The world gave those people something because they were paying attention. That is the covenant of the hidden boss in any great open-world game, and Skyrim honors it consistently across its entire catalog of optional, unmarked, and simply there if you look encounters. There is one final thing worth saying, and it is about the relationship between all these hidden encounters and the larger question that Skyrim is always asking quietly: what does it mean to be the Dragonborn? The main quest has an answer for this. You are the person destined to defeat Alduin, born with the specific gift of a dragon's soul in a mortal body, equipped by that gift to do the thing the world requires. This is the formal answer. It is true in the lore, and it gives the main quest its momentum, but the hidden encounters answer differently. The Ebony Warrior appears when you reach level 80, not when you complete the main quest. Karstag can be summoned before or after the Dragonborn questline, before or after defeating Alduin, before or after anything the world has decided is important. Volthuriol does not know anything about the prophecy when you wake him. He responds to the Thu'um because that is what he responds to, because the Thu'um is the voice of draconic authority, and something in him that has been sleeping in the dark for 1,000 years wakes when it hears that authority. The hidden encounters answer, you are the person who looked. You are the person who climbed the mountain to find out what was at the top, who read the notes on the dead scholar's body, who used the Thu'um on the orb just to see what would happen. The prophecy is real and the destiny is real, but the specific texture of who you are in this world, the particular Dragonborn that you played, the choices you made about where to look, is assembled from moments exactly like these. From the encounters that nobody told you to have, and that you chose because you were curious. The world is enormous. It is colder in some places than in others. The fire is lower now, and outside the wind has found the long note it will hold until morning. Some of the hidden things are still waiting. Some of them have always been there and always will be, in the specific sense that a well-designed world is always there between playthroughs. Patient, consistent, unchanged. The Pale Lady will be sealed again the next time a new game begins. The sword on the altar. The forest growing undisturbed in the underground cold. Otar will be locked in his sarcophagus with Cyrek and Torsten at their posts. The orb will be hanging in Blackreach, amber and bright, with Volthuriol sleeping somewhere in the dark behind it. They wait for the next person with the right kind of curiosity. They always have. Rest now. Let everything go quiet. The mountains are still there, and the dungeons are still there, and somewhere in the blue dark of Blackreach, a dragon sleeps with his eyes closed, dreaming of the sky he has never had. Sleep well. If tonight helped you rest, if these stories found you somewhere soft and gave you somewhere beautiful to settle, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment with where in the world you are and what time you are watching from. I read every single one of them. Tell me what you want to explore next, what corners of Skyrim you want to hear about, what other worlds you want to walk through in the late hours when everything else goes quiet. The road goes on, so do we. Sweet dreams, cozy nights. End of script. Appendix of Shadows, the encounters that fall between categories. Before we truly settle for the night, There are a handful of encounters that resist easy categorization, but deserve their moment in the light. These are the ones that exist in the exact margin between the obvious and the hidden, the ones that most players have heard of, but few have actually found on their own. The Crypt of Ingvild sits on a small coastal island northeast of Dawnstar, accessible only by boat, and boats, in Skyrim, are objects that exist in the world without the option to use them, which means reaching Ingvild requires finding the specific marker that triggers the loading screen to the island. It is the kind of location that appears on no road, signposted by nothing, visible from the distant shore as a ruin on an ice-locked island, and therefore the kind of location that rewards exactly the player who sees a ruin on a distant island and decides they need to know what is inside it. Inside is Arundel, a necromancer, formerly a respected member of a community. His journals reveal he was driven out of Dawnstar after his obsession with a specific category of undead became too visible to ignore. What he has done in Ingvild with that obsession is deeply disturbing in a way that sits outside most of Skyrim's violence. The Draugr he has raised are exclusively female. He keeps journals about them. The content of those journals is the kind of horror that does not announce itself as horror, but simply becomes clear through the accumulation of detail, the way that some real-world horrors work. His boss fight is relatively straightforward mechanically, but Ingvild is one of those locations that stays with players specifically because of its restraint. It never says anything explicit. It simply shows you the evidence, and the evidence is enough. The island and the crypt are the right setting for this specific story. Isolated, hard to reach, the kind of place where someone could do things for a long time before anyone came looking. The Forge Master at Nchardak, introduced in the Dragonborn DLC, is a Dwarven Centurion variant that serves as the gatekeeper to the dungeon's main mechanism. Nchardak is the facility that houses the Black Book epistolary acumen, and reaching it requires using the water control systems that the Dwemer installed to protect their more valuable installations. The Forge Master is larger than a standard Centurion, more durable, and guards the chamber where the primary control pedestal is located. The fight with it in the flooded lower level, managing stamina and positioning in a space that is partially underwater, is one of the more unusual boss fight environments in the DLC content. The Black Books themselves deserve mention in this context because accessing them, traveling to Apocrypha, navigating Hermaeus Mora's realm, dealing with the specific enemies that exist there, is itself a category of hidden encounter that most players who complete the Dragonborn questline partially engage with, but few explore thoroughly. Each Black Book has its own interior Apocrypha layout, its own set of seekers and lurkers to deal with, its own path to the knowledge contained within it. The Seekers are among the most unusual enemies in the game, floating, robed, without visible locomotion, using attacks that combine physical force with psychological disorientation. The Lurkers are massive aquatic things that emerge from the black water, that fills certain chambers of Apocrypha, tentacled and slow, but devastating in melee range. None of these enemies exist in Tamriel. They are native to Apocrypha, products of Hermaeus Mora's specific domain, and fighting them is fighting things that were never part of the mortal world's ecology, never subject to natural selection or survival pressures or any of the constraints that shaped everything else in Skyrim's encounter design. They exist because Mora made them, to serve the purposes of his realm, and those purposes include discouraging casual visitors from taking what they have not earned the right to take. The Scholar's Library, as Apocrypha essentially is, has security. The security is enormous and patient and does not sleep. Zah Chrysos, one of the 3 additional dragon priests added in the Dragonborn DLC, guards the Bloodskull Barrow on Solstheim and connects to the Bloodskull Blade, a 2-handed sword that shoots energy projectiles with power attacks and which is required to solve the dungeon's final puzzle. His name means Blood Curse. He wields lightning magic and appears at the end of a dungeon that is itself one of the more interesting architectural spaces in the DLC. The barrow is unusually large and connects to an active Reekling's camp in ways that make clearing it more complex than a straight dungeon run. His mask, when you collect it alongside the other Dragonborn DLC Dragon Priest masks, contributes to a second set that can be combined for their own reward, an approach that the Solstheim Dragon Priests mirror from the main game's Dragon Priest mask mechanic, extending the collection incentive across both land masses. Dukaon, the Frost-specialized Dragon Priest of White Ridge Sanctum, presides over a dungeon that adds spiders, Dwemer spider constructs that the player can actually reprogram and tame, to the standard Nordic dungeon encounter grammar. White Ridge Sanctum is a Dwemer installation overlapping with a Nordic ruin, which creates an architectural hybrid that suggests the two cultures interacted with each other in this specific location in ways that their general historical relationship does not always suggest. Dukan was there before the Dwemer, or after them, or simultaneously with them in some capacity that the dungeon's architecture implies without explaining. His name means deceiver, and his frost magic is among the most reliably dangerous in the DLC's Dragon Priest encounters, capable of freezing stamina at rates that make melee combat genuinely difficult to sustain. The Cyclone word wall he guards contains the first word of a shout, exclusive to the Dragonborn DLC, a circular wind blast that staggers multiple enemies simultaneously and which has no equivalent in the base game. Getting it requires defeating him. Defeating him requires dealing with both him and the respawning spider constructs that fill the Sanctum's chambers. Azadal, the last of the 3 additional Dragonborn DLC Dragon Priests, is found in Kolbjorn Barrow and requires completing a multi-stage quest called Unearthed. The barrow is being excavated by a merchant named Rallis Sidaris, who keeps encountering obstacles that he needs money and assistance to overcome. Each stage of funding the excavation uncovers more of the barrow and ultimately reveals that Rallis has been used as a host for Azadal's will, possessed, essentially, by the Dragon Priest from whatever distance the tomb maintained over the excavating figures above it. Azadal is unique among Dragon Priests in his specific mastery. He was a Nord enchanter, the greatest Nord enchanter who ever lived, according to the lore, who studied the Dwemer's enchanting techniques and developed an understanding of magical enhancement that exceeded anything available to his contemporaries. His desperation to apply that knowledge to himself led him to the dragon cult and ultimately to the catastrophic experiments in Solstheim that ended with his imprisonment. His mask enhances all enchanting skill, reflecting his core identity, and the set of unique armor found throughout Kolbjorn Barrow, the armor of Azadal, is the most extensively enchanted item set in the game, with specific pieces providing benefits to different aspects of magic use and combat that interact with each other in ways that reward players who build specifically around the complete set. The Unearthed quest is emotionally complex in the specific way that many of the best Skyrim quests are. Rallis Sidaris is both a victim and a perpetrator. He sought the excavation for his own reasons, he manipulated the player's funding for his own benefit, and he was simultaneously being used as a tool by something far older and more powerful than himself. Whether to kill him at the quest's end or spare him is a choice that the game frames without clear right answer, which is the correct framing for a moral situation where both things are simultaneously true. He was victimized. He also made choices. The space between those two facts is the space where most real moral complexity lives. And so the dungeons of Skyrim and Solstheim contain together not just encounters and bosses and rewards, but the accumulated history of a world that has been running for longer than any individual story within it. Every seal that was placed eventually opened. Every imprisoned thing eventually found its moment. Every hidden door eventually found someone curious enough to try the handle. The night is very quiet now. The coals are the color of resting things. Outside, somewhere, there is snow falling on a word wall that has not been read in a century, and the words in the stone glow faintly with the memory of the voice that carved them there. The world keeps its secrets patiently. It is always waiting for the right question. Sleep well. Thank you for being here. There is one more thing before the quiet takes over completely. It is about the giants. Most of Skyrim's players know that giants are not initially aggressive. The camps near Whiterun, the herders moving their mammoths along ancient migration routes across the tundra between holds. They will leave you alone if you leave them alone. The hostility is reactive, not inherent. They are not predators. They are herders, semi-nomadic, following patterns that were established long before the Nords arrived, and that will presumably continue long after the current political drama resolves itself one way or another. What most players do not notice is how specific this makes the exceptions. The giant near Broken Tower Redoubt, standing vigil over a dead mammoth, is grieving. He will not attack unless attacked first. He is not there because he is aggressive. He is there because his companion died, and he has not yet done whatever it is that giants do when they acknowledge that a loss has become permanent. The giant at the sleeping tree camp, guarding the alien organism that produces narcotic sap, is there not because the Khajiit caravans hired him, but because something about the sleeping tree draws him? Whatever the tree is, an alien organism, a crashed thing from somewhere else, a botanical impossibility that produces commercially valuable sap as an afterthought, it also potentially is interesting to a giant. Perhaps there is something about the resonance of whatever the tree actually is that appeals to creatures who live in the open and who notice the world differently than urban mortals do. These are the hidden bosses that require the most specific circumstances to become bosses at all. You have to attack them. The encounter with an aggressive giant is always the result of a choice that did not have to be made. The game is consistent about this, and the consistency is its own kind of statement. Not everything large and dangerous wants to fight you. Some things are simply present in the world, doing their own thing, and the violence is the exception rather than the rule. The mournful giant by the broken tower does not become a boss unless you make him one. He is, by default, simply someone whose friend died. Skyrim has the dignity to let that be the whole story, if you are willing to let it. And that, finally, is the last thing to carry into sleep tonight. A world in which the most powerful optional encounters are optional precisely because they are waiting for you to be ready. The dragon priests seal themselves and keep their own counsel. The ebony warrior waits for you to reach a level where the fight means something. Karstag's skull sits in the glacier until the right person notices it. Volthuriol sleeps in Blackreach until someone decides to find out what the Thuum does to an orb of Dwemer light. They are not chasing you. They are not hunting you through the world's streets. They are resting, patient, in the specific places that make the most sense for what they are. And when you find them, when the encounter happens, it happens because you chose it, because you looked. There is something about that which feels like kindness, even if the thing you find at the end of the looking is very dangerous indeed. Good night. The fire will hold. The mountains are still there. And somewhere in the dark below Blackreach, the dragon sleeps on.